We anticipate in the next 10 to 12 years approximately 86 million Hispanics coming into the United States and 41 million Asians. You have been the majority minority for 400 years in this country. You have been the number 2 population for 400 years. You're going to get kicked out of being number 2. You're going to go down and become number 4. Now, common sense, even a 3rd grade education would tell you, if you didn't get anything when you were number 2, you all jumped ahead of me, but anyway, you can guess what you're going to get when you become number 4.
President Biden, do you support reparations?
Well, I mean, since I haven't spoken on this, got a chance. Number one, the reason we're the country we are is because of immigration. We've been able to cherry pick the best from every single continent. The people who come here have determination, resilience. They are ready to stand up and work like the devil. We have 24 out of every 100 children in our school today is Hispanic. The idea that we are going to walk away and not provide every opportunity for them is not only stupid and immoral, but it's bad for America. They are the future of America.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. And this is what we are faced with. And this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington, in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
We are owed $104 trillion on the very low end, plus $735 billion recurring. This number does not include the cost of about 50 Black Wall Streets that were decimated, nor compound interest from 2017 when Sean D. Rochester's book, The Black Tax, was published, nor the cost of Black life, nor the cost of living increases, nor the war on drugs, nor the current day pandemic. The number I'm working with is for slavery, Jim Crow, and accrued ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantage in the country our ancestors built with their lives.
Good morning on the West Coast. Good morning in the mountain. Good morning in the Central. Good morning on the East Coast. You know exactly who it is, family. Angela Nirvana, your hostess with the mostest on the reparationist perspective, bringing you those treatment hot topics and making the case for reparations, making the case for weaponizing our vote, socializing our suffering. Hello, one and all. Welcome, ScrewTube. Welcome, Twitter. Welcome, Facebook. And we're back. It's day 1, part 1 of the California Reparations Task Force hearings. I see you, Brian Bennett. Thank you for joining the live. Yes. We're about to get into it. We are going to be streaming live from Oakland, California. You guys know the devastations there. You know how we've been gentrified up out of this state. You know how we've been legislated up out of the state. While folks sit up here and question why they need to pay us reparations, when their institutional systemic racism in their legislation is how we got on the bottom of this Titanic as the anchor of this country's capitalism. All the ancestors woke me up at 5 a.m. this morning, y'all. I'm still on hold, waiting for my number, so that's the background music you hear. I'm still on hold, waiting for California Department of Justice to do something with their streaming so I can share it here. Yeah. But let me tell you something. If we can't see it, we gonna hear it today on this Bluetooth speaker of mine. That's what we gonna do. We gonna get in these hearings by any means necessary, whether they screw up on the darn streaming or hide the streaming, whatever they into, child. You know the tricks in these polys, okay? The politics are real. The politics are real. Yes, Brian Banner, even Boston, Massachusetts is talking reparations. Oh, that's because of us, family. Uh-oh. We got action. Let me see something. Hold on, y'all. Let me share my screen. We're live.
Push on, and then this is like if I want to speak, I push here. Okay. This, when we want to talk, we just push speak. No, the and then yes, and when you're waiting for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right, task force members, if we can get seated so we can start business. We have a tight agenda. Thank you. Good. This is Vice Chair. I don't know who. Good morning, how are you? Yeah. All right.
It wants to talk.
Yeah, thank you.
To talk now. Okay. It's hot.
Okay. All right. Okay. Today is Wednesday, December 14th, 2022, and the time is 9:03 a.m. The AB 3121 Task Force meeting is now called to order. Good morning. My name is Camila Moore, and I'm the chairperson of the First in the Nation California Reparations Task Force to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans, with a special consideration for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. Before we begin, we will have Parliamentarian Johnson do a roll call for attendance and determining whether we have quorum. Parliamentarian Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair Moore,
Present.
Vice Chair Brown, Member Bradford, Member Grills, Member Holder, Member Jones Sawyer. Yo. Member Lewis.
Present.
Member Montgomery Stepp.
Here.
Member Tamaki.
Here.
Madam Chair, there are 9 task force members and the number needed for a quorum is 5. The number present is 7. Madam Chair, a quorum has been established.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. Welcome, members of the task force and members of the public, to our 11th public hearing and our 3rd in-person public hearing at the historic Oakland City Hall. We have an action-packed agenda today. We will hear from local and municipal reparations leaders from across the state of California, and we'll begin to hear from advisory committee members around potential proposals for a final report of the task force. We will now go to public comment, which will last between 9:05 to 10:05 a.m. But before we do so, I would like to acknowledge Council Member Carol Fife and Assembly Member Mia Bonta, who has some opening remarks for us. Can we please give them an applause?
First of all, I would like to welcome everyone that is here to participate with us, including the esteemed body. Welcome you to the city of Oakland. This is my district, Oakland City Council District 3, and I feel that it is so fitting to have this convening in Oakland because we are literally ground zero for the systemic racist practices that have led to so many of the outcomes that we see on the news that people take issue with, but have never come with the ideal solutions for. So the work that you all are doing here today is critical. The individuals who are showing up for this testimony is critical because this is the pressure that is needed to fight the fight that so many people that came before us have tried to do. But what's different about today is that it is well recognized that if we want to move forward as a society, as a culture, as a people, collectively, then we got to do right by Black folks. Period. We understand that when you have an illness, right, and you go to the doctor and they ask about, what's bothering you? You can go in with October, you can go, whatever it is, they will ask you, what is your history of illness in your family? What legacy do you have with your parents or grandparents? What runs through your family in terms of illness? Generational trauma is never on that list. But if we don't heal generational trauma, then we will have generational trauma. And that is what America is experiencing. And we see that in Oakland on the forefront of all of the things that have to do with closing schools in Black neighborhoods, increased crime, where there has been divestment in Black communities. And with the Oakland Black New Deal, something that I brought forward when I came into office, it was a solution to these issues. So no matter what happens on the state level, in Oakland, we're going to get it done. So if you don't know about the Black New Deal to address some of the ways that municipalities and private industry has divested and systemically hurt the Black community, please go to carolfife.org and look at the Black New Deal, because that is one of the ways that we will address it locally. The work that you all are doing statewide will help us guide the same process through the entire state of California, because the harm is real. And the people here today to testify about that, and the work that you all have done collecting this robust set of suggestions to bring back to the state is invaluable. It is literally priceless. And I'm grateful for your work. I'm grateful for your participation. And I look forward to accountability when this gets back to our legislators so that we can have real action. Thank you all for being here today. I appreciate you all. I appreciate your work.
We'll now hear from California Assembly Member Mia Bonta if she is present. Okay. Now we will turn to the public comment period, and I will turn to Aisha Martin Walton for that agenda item.
Good morning, Chair Moore and task force members and members of the public. My name is Aisha Martin Walton. I'm with the Department of Justice, and the task force would like to hear from all of you. Test, test. Can you hear? Is that better? Thank you. Can you hear me now? Maybe I can go to another speaker.
Can you hear this, Mike?
All right. Okay, so the task force would like to hear from all of you. The public comment period will be for 1 hour, and each person will have 3 minutes to speak. Please be advised that, in fairness to everyone, at the 3-minute mark, you may be politely interrupted. However, please know that the public comment period during each meeting, there's one during each meeting, and the task force encourages you to participate. You may also submit written comments at any time via email at reparationstaskforce@doj.ca.gov. This morning, we have speakers in person and on the phone. So, Chair Moore, how would you like to proceed?
We'll start with those who are here in person.
So if you are here in person and would like to make a comment, please approach the mic, and you will have 3 minutes, and I will tell you when to begin. All right, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for letting me speak this morning. Good morning, Council. Good morning, Task Force. Good morning, neighbors. Good morning, beautiful city of Oakland. My name is Raphael Plunkett, and I'm so happy to be here. This is my first time visiting Oakland, and it really is beautiful. I am here with my husband, Joe Plunkett. We have driven up from Diamond Bar, and we enjoyed the ride up, and we're so happy to follow the progress of this unit. I'm also representing CJAC, the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. I wanted to first thank you all for this hearing today and tomorrow. I also want to thank you for your lineage determination, and please know that I fully support your decision. I ask that the future hearings be held on weekends and off work hours. Joe and I are retired, so many others are not, and I have been charged by my community to bring back information. I've been charged by my family in Chicago to bring back information, and it would be really nice if a lot of other people could participate as well. I ask that those of you that are legislators, that you please introduce and pass reparations legislation immediately. I ask that the report be distributed widely. Please also consider printing a pamphlet with the executive summary and the recommendations, making it readily accessible and distribute it widely. It's not so conducive for everyone to have access to a 500-page report and read through it. I think a smaller pamphlet would be really helpful. I also wanted to make sure you understand that with the rumors, the innuendo, and the hostility developing towards this process, that you know that there are many of us who support and appreciate your extraordinary efforts. We support your determinations, and we are doing what we can behind the scenes to make reparations move forward. Thank you very much.
My name is Reginald Romaine. I'm from LA, born in 1966. My question is this: where did you guys come up with these years? And you stop at 77. We going through traumatic racism today. We getting knees on our neck today. So why you stop at 77? In 84, we got news about Oliver North and about the Contras. I personally bought dope from Freeway Rick. I did my time to society. In 84, we had mass incarceration, red line and everything still in. Why would you cut it off at 77? We need it to today. And another thing is about, what about our ancestors, my mama, my grandma, my brother, that's not here no more? Where their money gonna go? Is they gonna get the same reparations too? You know, we need these questions answered, because a lot of people, I have a salon, I've been in business for 25 years. My thing is at this, at 420, 1 year, which is Hitler Day, in Temecula, California, I moved away from LA. My business was vandalized from KKK members' initiation day. A police person that I cut his hair when he was little told me, he said, you know what today is? Today is Hitler initiation day. They hit 2 black businesses then. So I said, we still going through stuff now. So why are you gonna cut off at 77? I don't understand. I thank y'all for hearing my words, and Black People's Power to it.
Thank you. Next commenter.
Good morning. My name is Marion Johnson, and I am a resident of Oakland, East Oakland in particular, and I'm also a resident of what was Russell City. In 1963, we were forced out of our land, off of our property. We were given nothing in order for us to move on. We were forced into East Oakland, which was the only place we were able to live. We weren't allowed in other communities because there were statutes that said no Black person could live in those communities. In our communities in East Oakland, we were over-policed. We were disenfranchised. It felt like there was no room for us, that we weren't worthy of anything. The only comfort we felt for a short period of time was when the Black Panthers came into our neighborhoods and made sure we were safe getting to school, made sure we had food to eat in the morning. But other than that, the police were not there to help us. The schools were not there. There was the preschool to prison pipeline. I remember the old books that had writing and scribbling in there. For years, we never got new books. I was followed by the police for certain reasons. My brothers were brutalized and put in prison. My grandparents came to California in the 1940s. They landed in West Oakland. They were pushed out of there by the 980 project. Then they landed in Russell City, where my mother and my father met and married. They were forced out of there when I was an infant, placing us in a place that was not safe. I can't tell you how many times we went to developments to look at the new model homes. They let us go in. By the time we got back to fill out paperwork, offices were empty every time. That wasn't a coincidence. They weren't going to allow us anywhere. So I'm glad I'm able to see that this task force is here to provide reparations for our community. I don't know anything about dates, but I know what happened to my family, and my mother is still here. And I'm hoping that she's able to see what comes from this and that she gets some form of justice and some form of peace. Thank you for your time. Appreciate you.
Thank you for your comments this morning. Next speaker, please.
Good morning. My name is Michael Johnson, and the previous speaker that you heard was my sister, Marion Johnson. We come from the same family that was impacted not once, but twice by what we have. We were impacted not once, but twice. What my sister spoke to was the maternal side of our family. What I'm about to speak to is the paternal side of my family. My grandmother, 60 years ago, spoke at a committee similar to this one. It was the committee that talked about the public hearings on the Russell City Development Project, January 22nd, 1963, at a time where they were allowed to speak publicly. They spoke twice. What my sister spoke to was the maternal side of our family. What I'm about to speak to is the paternal side of my family. My grandmother, history are doomed to repeat it. This is the 11th meeting, I believe, of this particular committee. And we are thankful for the opportunity and the efforts that have been made to bring this information and the concerns and the redress to light. But at the end of the day, it's not just about what it is that we see in the report. And you will find a lot of our families, a glimpse of our family story on pages 71, 74, and 75 of chapter 5 on housing segregation. My grandmother came from Louisiana. She moved to San Francisco and was a cable car operator. She was forced out of the Western Addition and forced to move to Russell City, and had forced relocation from her for an industrial park in Russell City. When she got to that meeting and she spoke at that meeting, she had a piece of paper in her hand that basically said, "This is your eviction notice," before the plan had even been approved. and that's documented. What I find interesting, what I would leave you with is this. Both my sister and I have been participating in what Hayward is calling the Restorative Reparative Justice Project. That group was formed, we were duly elected, and our first meeting was on December 1st. We actually have a second meeting of that steering committee tonight. We started on December 1st, but by the time that we had started, the city, and I want to thank Artavia Berry and the Community Services Committee for actually crafting the apology that started the work. I also want to acknowledge the California Association of Realtors that on October 14th of this year also identified their collusion.
Excuse me for interrupting you in the middle of your sentence. I'm so sorry, but your time is up. Thank you.
Let me just say this. We appreciate the efforts, but we want to bring to your attention the importance of hearing the stories from the families that were impacted and by what has happened in the state of California.
Thank you so very much. Next speaker, please.
Good morning. My name is Lori Williams. I'm a small business owner in the state of California. I'm a descendant of a slave. My father was a small business owner in Berkeley, California. He was a general building contractor. I'm 54 years old. I watched my father work until he died.
This is a problem that small business owners have in California.
Because he could not
I got my application in on time. We are overlooked. We want to grow our businesses. We want to expand. We want to create jobs in our communities for our people. This is generational. This is just not starting to happen. And for me to look at the executive summary and see one paragraph on having small business grants for our businesses where we sustain ourselves is disheartening. I would like to see this community and the number, the dollar amount include people that have not gotten loans, people that have had lease discrimination against them, people that cannot grow their business here in the state of California. It needs to be addressed, and it needs to be part of the reparations task force. You guys really need to look at this in a bigger light. I have served on the board of Cameo, the California Association for Micro Enterprise Opportunity. I have worked at a micro enterprise development organization. I have seen immigrants come into California, be here less than a year, and get money to start their businesses where we have worked for generations and cannot get the capital we need to start, expand, the technical assistance we need to make lives for ourselves and be self-sustainable. We need that. I want you guys to look at that and take that into consideration with reparations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Next speaker, please.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على Muhammad wa Muhammad. Giving honor to my illustrious and industrial forefathers, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, Noble Drew Ali, and Malcolm X. Islam. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? A little bit, okay. So I want to be paid. This is what you see I looked at the agenda and I tried to answer the 5 questions on there. Question number 1, what are the damaged time frames? The damaged time frames are as follows. 1619 to 1865, we're under enslavement. 1865 to 1877, we're under Reconstruction. 1877 to 1965, we're under Jim Crow segregation. 1965 to 2022, we're up under legal discrimination. Now, formal apologies was given by this government, the Congress and the Senate, HR 194 and SR 39, apologizing for slavery, Jim Crow lynching, and the above. The significance of a formal apology is the admission of guilt And now the United States is able or willing to stand in liability for its wrongs or its harms. It's not a payout. We got to do a little bit more work, but the door is open. Number two, will there be a California residency requirement? If yes, how will it be determined? The residency requirement for California and all 50 states and the federal government is simply this: to identify and to classify as African American. Number three, what year determines the beginning of the harm? Are there different starting points and ending points for each atrocity category? 1619 is the year that determines the beginning of the harm, and there are 4 atrocity categories, which I've already named, but I'll go over them again. They all have beginning and ending points. 1619, 1865, that's enslavement, the establishment of slave codes. 1865 to 1877, that's post-slavery, Reconstruction, Black codes are inseminated. 1877 to 1965, Jim Crow segregation. 1965 to 2022, legal segregation. That's 403 years of harm, which equals 16 generations of oppression. Number four, will direct descendants and or victims, African Americans, of U.S. slavery in California who meet the residency requirement be compensated? Simply, all those who identify and classify as African Americans will be compensated, period.
I'm so sorry. Your time is.
I gotta say this last one, please. Okay, so listen. Reparations are to be paid in gold bullion to all of my antebellum enslaved ancestors and their progeny, measured in the amount of 4 troy grams of .999 gold bullion per each antebellum slave.
Your time is up, sir. We need to be fair to everyone.
For
Thank
16
you so much.
generations.
Again, I'm so sorry to interrupt you in your powerful statement, but thank you so much.
Yeah, I got it. So if you want to hear more,
Public comment will also be tomorrow, so we welcome you. Perfect. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone, for your patience. All right, next commenter.
Yes, can everyone hear me? Yes, I would like to say good morning to Chair Moore and all the members of the First in the Nation and the Nation Reparations Task Force. Thank you for having me. My name is Darlene Crumity, and I am a member of CJEC and Arc Bay area. I would like to thank the task force for choosing lineage as the standard for those who receive reparations. And also, may I encourage the task force to hold the balance of the hearings on weekends, on off hours, in order for the community at large to attend, especially the Black American female community who is affected by the harms. And in closing, I would like to say I am quite familiar with the 5 international standards of reparations, compensation, restitution, rehabilitation, satisfactions, and guarantees of non-repetition. I feel that compensation should be number 1. This should be made a priority, especially for the Black American female seniors of the post-civil rights community. Time is running out. This is our last stand. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Our next speaker.
Hello, my name is Alan Sanford, and my great-great-grandfather was J.A. Sanford. Any of you read about the Dred Scott case, then you'll know that he was the one that started that filibuster. In 1986, Senator Joe Biden put the asset forfeiture law on the books. In 1999, Bill Clinton deregulated the banks. In 2004, Securities and Exchange Commission was warned by the FBI about the conflicts of interest between politicians and bankers. 2006 to 2008, Eric Holder found the banks guilty. As a matter of fact, it was Wells Fargo and Wachovia guilty of laundering $378 billion. City of Oakland had an opportunity to get that money. Not taken. 18 months after Mr. Holder's conviction, Loretta Lynch found HSBC guilty of laundering over $200 trillion. Now, my proposal is that the banks and the 1% keep the money that the banks stole between 1986 and 2006, take that 200+ trillion, put it on debit cards, give everybody in America, even the 99%, one with a $300 per day limit, and then we'll resume this conversation about reparations. Because then everybody will have a place to stay and something to eat.
Sir, thank you so much this morning. Our next commenter, however, before you begin to speak, I'd like to check in with the chair. It's about 9:30, and according to the schedule at 9:35, we would begin to take the online callers. So just wanted to give you a heads up, but we do have several people here who would like to speak.
So yes, at 9:35, we will go to the online comments. Yes, so for folks who aren't able to make public comment in person today, there'll be another opportunity tomorrow. So we can proceed.
Okay. All right.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Hello, my name is Josiah Williams. I'm with the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California, an American Redress Coalition of California. I appreciate each and every one of you being here. I just wanted to bring out a few points. One, I think we should have the task force hearings, the rest of them on the weekend, just because a lot of people I know actually wanted to be here, but they have to actually be at work and they can't really take off, so like they weren't able to actually, be able to give their voice because they're required to be at work. So in future, hopefully we can do that.
Family, this is not me. They're buffering badly.
Sure that cash is a priority. We know that we need programs and everything as well, but wealth was stolen, wealth should be returned. Basically, I thank you for choosing lineage as the eligibility standard and not allowing our justice claims to be colonized. I really appreciate that. And lastly, we can actually start working on legislation now rather than waiting until the end of the task force. So if we can start getting some things put in place so that when reparations happen, we already have different things established. That was it. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Aisha?
Yes.
So we'll allow just only 10 more minutes for in-person public comment so we can get through this line. So I'm asking folks who are in the line to try to keep it brief. And if you have the opportunity to come tomorrow, please do so. And then for the remainder of the time, we will go to our online comments. So again, for folks who are in the line, try to keep it as brief as possible, not try to limit your speech or anything, but we want to make sure that all folks are able to participate. So go ahead. Right, so we're allowing everyone who's in the line to speak. We're just saying.
Do we want to, in terms of the balance of time, allow less time for each person so that everyone gets an opportunity to say? How's that?
If that's allowed,
if that's okay with the task force?
We can do 2 minutes.
It's up to the task force. One, I mean, we have about 8 people. Are you all able to get it out? Say your speak in a minute? Can we try that? We have 12 people, 12 minutes. All right, you're on. Thank you.
I've been tracking the AB 3121 task force since its inception. And because it's received more visibility than when it first convened, it makes sense that there are some things that bear repeating. However, there have been some things that have gone amiss as of late. Some things worth mentioning are the way the message has been handled by the media. The Breakfast Club, for example, has not talked about this commission since its inception, at least not that I can recall, yet the only time they choose to bring up the subject is when they let Dr. Umar Johnson speak loudly and wrongly about the details. It would be nice if Charlemagne or DJ Envy had on the chair or grassroots representatives to have an actual discussion on the topic. And this sentiment goes for the wider progressive media punditry at large. People like Breonna Joy Gray and those who are formerly known as the Fred Hampton leftists, now called Revolutionary Blackout Network, Compton J and Nick, Sabi Saz on Twitter, who collectively have done their best to ignore any of the advocacy work done by truly progressive political groups. Also, people like Jessica Ann Mitchell Ayuar, aka Jam, Mutale Nkande, who conspired to write a piece so salacious and fraught with lies against grassroots organizers that even Harvard had to retract their statements. And the others.
Thank you so much. Your time is up. I'm so sorry. We're going to try to get to everybody today. All right, begin your minute presentation. Thank you, speaker.
Hey everyone, Max Fennell here. Mine's going to be very quick and brief. So the tangibles of what I'm asking for is $350,000 per Black American in California that's eligible. Small business grant, $250,000, and land 15 to 20 acres. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Before we go to the next speaker, I would like to notice member Holder.
My name is Anonua Kolabode. I am a youth organizer for God Reparations. This year, I've been working with other youth organizers by tabling in different Black communities, by going into the streets so we can be seen in different areas. Especially in Richmond, hearing the community's racial and discriminatory statements, I have been learning more about our community's family history, their experiences, and hopes this reparation is going to give them. We are hoping to go to get low-income or unhoused communities' voices heard. Free the land and God reparations.
Thank you. Next speaker.
I am Alita Torre with God Reparations. I am under the leadership of our youth. They have been going to cities, streets, and the hood to do what we have not been doing, which is block by block listening to the people. This is a boots on the ground data collection, and we are grateful for those that are in the audience, and we're grateful for you all in doing your work, but we must remember this is not just a middle class, Black middle class, Black bourgeoisie. This has to be done on the local level. We have 50,000 people since 2010 from Oakland, where the Black Panthers and Black Lives Matter reside, that had to leave. Displacement is not okay. So please, like Anu Luwapu has said, join us with this movement, 57 counties, free the land, as Queen Mother Moore would say, and God reparations.
Thank you so much. Next speaker.
First of all, praise God. I thank God for being here. Second of all, my name is Imhotep Il, original Asiatic. Second of all, I would like to say America owes us the whole goddamn country. Because if it's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and a life for a life, they owe us the whole goddamn country. They have killed over 600 million and counting of original people here in America. When they gave Ukraine all that money, $250 billion, that was a slap in our face. Here in America, original people that has been oppressed, compressed, and depressed, and we still being oppressed, and y'all really don't have no ear or no eye or no heart to sympathize with our condition. What I'm saying is, give us what y'all owe us and let us get up out of here because y'all owe us the whole goddamn country.
Thank you, sir, for your comments. Next speaker.
Madam Chair, members of the board, those of you at the sound of my voice, I'm Morris Griffin, better known as Big Money Griff, strong community activist, leader, and problem solver. Wakanda forever. I'm here today to ask that you and demand that you give us a reparations check to the day we die. Why? Because we have done everything to make this the richest country in the world. And I might add, when it comes to consumer fraud, which I've given some of you copies of, we have already won a portion of reparations for consumer fraud. And so I'm here today to say to you all that it's time that we receive a reparations check. How much, Big Money?
$5,000 to $10,000. So I would ask that you spread the word, what you heard with Governor Gavin Newsom, as well as Shirley Weber, that we are demanding this on this day for reparations. That's all of my time. Thanks for your time. I'm out.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Next speaker. Hello. I came all the way from Texas to tell you that Texas is watching each and every one of you. We're watching to see what you're going to do for Black Americans, not African Americans, but Black Americans who built this country, who is owed reparations. And I just want you to know, Texas is watching you, particularly Houston and Dallas. We're watching you. We have been doing pull-ups all over the country, demanding our reparations, and we are watching you to make sure that you are doing reparations for lineage-based Black Americans. Lineage-based reparations. Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is I.T. Williams. As a California resident, born and raised in this state, I stand before you to contribute to the efforts of this reparations task force, specifically employment discrimination and the systems within the state of California, which perpetuate harms against African Americans. First, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, DFEH, is responsible for enforcing fair housing and employment laws that make it illegal to discriminate against the job applicant or employee because of a protected characteristic. However, DFEH does not enforce or resolve employment discrimination complaints filed by African Americans. There is a history of legitimate discrimination complaints commonly resulted in the issuance of right to sue notices without investigation or botched investigations with inaccuracies or false narratives designed to close out these complaints. In most cases, when African Americans file and DFEH or EOC, these administrative mediators.
I am so sorry that your time is up. We were trying to give everyone 1 minute, but thank you so very much. Please,
no, it's not long. How many
please, you have 1 minute.
3 minutes.
One minute. No, we're done. We have 2 more speakers, but however, you can submit your comments in writing or come back tomorrow. However you would like to communicate, the task force does want to hear your comments. They're really important. And so the email is reparationstaskforce@doj.ca.gov, and they would love to hear the rest of your comments. But we need to move on to the other speakers. So we appreciate your patience this morning.
Okay.
Thank
I would
you.
like to get the opportunity to finish this and recommend.
I'm sorry, we have 2 other speakers, and I'm sorry, we do have to move on. So next speaker, please. I'm sorry, we do have to move on now. Tomorrow, no, tomorrow, yes. Yes, you can. I'm so sorry, I didn't understand your question.
How you doing? I'm gonna make this quick. My name is Dion Jenkins. 4 elements of reparations: defense, money, land, grants. 4 elements of every society, every nation: a defensive structure, an economy, land, and having access to that economy. If that is not being addressed, reparations is not whole. Reparation, repair is the root word. We cannot have repair if those elements are not addressed. I believe that if there's any housing compensation, it should be in recommendation in the median house price in the state of California, which is at least $830,000. I'll land. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We have time for 1 more speaker.
Morning, I'm Grady L. Leatherman Bay. I'm here to acknowledge the council, Department of Justice, and to deal with the Superior Court jurisdiction that's in compilation as well. I'm a climate change advocate. I have a new repository to hold the entitlement in the community, and I've been recognized under climate change to deal with funding under the new state, which would be El Magrib. Under El Magrib, we will deal with all commercial entitlements and all data. It's under Title 17, USC Code 301, preemption. The documents will be put on display and given to the council today under the Department of Justice because it's an extraordinary jurisdictional entitlement that gives us the right to hold our own entitlement without being minorities or minor of our own depositories. And so under this new entitlement, it's going to deal with the reparations. And this goes back to reparations. Reparations means repair from a civil war from a defeated state. This is a community. This is the state for the community. The longitude and latitude line up.
Sir,
Everything
I'm
that
so
started,
sorry.
and
Your
I'm
time
going,
is up.
everything that started was under the Attic of Mantis,
Your time
under
is up.
the Noah codes and the Christian Black codes
We
under
appreciate
1724 put us all under the
coming
commercial
back tomorrow or calling in. Thank you so much for showing up. Everyone in the audience, we really appreciate your patience this morning. The task force wants to try to hear from everyone, whether it's 3 minutes, 2 minutes, or 1 minute. So with that, just know we will be here tomorrow. You can come back tomorrow, call in, always submit your comments online. There's a series of several meetings going forward. So this is great. And Chair Moore, I'd like to turn it back over to you because we're going to switch over to for online call-in.
Sure.
All right. Hello, on AT&T, are you ready for our first caller?
Yes, and if you'd like to make a public comment, please press 1, then 0 on your phone. You'll hear an acknowledgement that you've been placed in queue, and the operator will give you your line number for your anonymous comment. Once again, you are in queue. The first comment comes from line 54. One moment. Your line is open.
Hi, my name is Alexis Allen. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I'm a small business owner. I have dealt with discrimination all the way up into the 2000s. I feel like the time frame that you guys are putting isn't correct. We've dealt with discrimination in medical fields through with the hospitals when I was pregnant, school district, and predominantly like for Black families out here in the areas where it's Beverly Hills and West Hollywood and things like that, we deal with extreme discrimination. My family store was burned down in the Rodney King's riot in Hollywood as well. And through just a lot of stress, it caused my family to even have a divorce. And the housing discrimination was horrible. We never owned a home out here, and actually been denied several times, and we've had good credit. We even made over a minimum wage, and I've gotten pushed out of every single job that I've had. Dealt with a lot of racism. So I feel like families in these areas are dealing with a lot of extreme discriminations. I mean, people making us feel like we're not as smart or as quick or things like that. It's ridiculous. And even in the school systems where, I was showed images of being Black people being brutalized and me being singled out, and being the only Black child in the class and things like that, being bullied, even as an adult, I'm still dealing with that energy. And even in announcing the reparations, people have been doing retaliation and things like that. Since you guys said it.
So, operator system, if you could hold for 1 second.
Yes, so I've been told there are over 50 people on the phone line. We have about 15 minutes for public comment. And
thank you. This is the operator. I want to get to you for your question or comment today. They'll be referring to you as line number 7.
Thank
Again,
you.
That's line number 7.
Thank you.
Yep, one moment.
Line 11.
Did you say 7?
Great. Can everybody hear me?
What?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, your line is open.
Okay. I'm getting some fit. I just want to make sure I'm live. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Please go ahead with your comment.
Okay, great, thank you. Jonathan Burgess here, of the Burgess family, and a member of CJAC. And I just want to make it clear that I appreciate the task force for what you're doing. But one point I really want to make is that it's important that when you look at eminent domain, you begin to look at the nefarious acts that were done and these things called Grange records, that we explore and see how the state of California, under the direction of park rangers, burned land belonging to Black families, my family, and several other foundational Black Americans included. I would also encourage you all to have these meetings on the weekends so that everybody can hear this knowledge and this information that's being revealed. Last but not least, just like the state of California changed Negro bar to Black miners bar, let's be clear, this is for foundational Black Americans. So the reparations will be lineage-based. It is lineage-based. And so, yes, Black is where we stand. I land my plane there, and I'll be back tomorrow for another comment on more information that we need to make sure we include in this report when we talk about not only the state, but the government can and the local county can, and the demise of Black people.
We'll go next to line number 9. Line 9, your line is open. Friday, your line is open.
Good morning. I'm Friday Jones. My name is Constance Jones Muhammad. I'm the president of the National Assembly of American Slavery Descendants. I have 3 quick points. 1, peoplehood. I want to thank this task force for recognizing the peoplehood of American freedmen. When the Freedmen's Bureau was established and Field Order 15 was given, it put American freedmen on par with Cherokee freedmen, Chickasaw freedmen, Choctaw freedmen, Creek freedmen, and Seminole freedmen. And it is these freedmen that are now renegotiating their treaties with both their indigenous nations and the United States. 2, anchor organizations will be needed through the remainder of this task force. And if there are anchor organizations running campaigns counter to the peoplehood of American freedmen and descendants, they should be removed as anchor orgs at this time. 3, midweek hearings do not allow for maximum participation by the public. I urge that you all reschedule the remaining sessions to Friday, Saturday. Thank you for your time. Blessings to our ancestors.
Thank you. We'll go next to line number 10.
Hi, I'm Tony Wynn, and I'm here on behalf of my grandparents, Charles and Isabel Sanders, who had purchased land in anticipation of moving to Russell City, but 1963 happened to Russell City. I have paperwork here, which I refer to as my receipt, to show that my grandparents only received back, after paying for the land, and I don't know how much they paid, but I'm sure it was more than $2,250. So I'm here speaking on behalf of Charles and Isabel Sanders, saying that we need to be paid what we weren't paid in 1963, and going forward, the buildings that are on our land now in Russell City need to pay us a quarterly rent, mortgage, however you want to call it, but we need to be paid on a regular basis for the people or the buildings and companies that are on our land now. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Kylie, next caller.
We'll go to line number 8.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Good morning, task force members. My name is Marcus Champion with CJAC and NAASBLA. I want to thank the task force for your work, but there is no reason why these in-person hearings should be happening during the work week. The majority of American freedmen are working men and women, so going forward, please make sure the remaining in-person hearings are held on Fridays and Saturdays. As we move into the proposal phase of this reparations task force, I want to reemphasize the importance of the lineage standard. There will be groups and organizations that will continue to distract from that fact, but the righteous moral argument, as well as the legal argument, is on the side of lineage-based reparations. Also related to proposals, I want to encourage Senator Bradford and Member John Sawyer to start pulling from submitted proposals and have legislation ready for the upcoming session. Most important is instituting the Office of American Freedmen Affairs that will work similar to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Office of Redress Administration that was created as a part of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, specifically for Japanese redress. direct cash payments, tax exempt status, free college education, grants for home ownership, business grants, access to low to no interest business capital and funding, access to low to no interest home loans, protected class status, similar to that of Native Americans.
Next caller, please.
We'll go next to line 40. Ernest, your line is open.
All right, thank you. Greetings, Task Force members. My name is Ernest Russell. I just want to call in and echo the sentiments of your California citizens. So I would, definitely echo CJAC with moving the hearing to Fridays and Saturdays so that we can have greater engagement from the Freedman community. I also want to thank the task force for passing a lineage-based measure and ask that you stand firm in passing that decision, as we are witnessing across the nation that race-based initiatives as well as race-neutral initiatives simply ignore the fact that reparations is owed to a specific community for a specific set of harms that were endured by their families or endured throughout generations. And so the last thing I would like to say is what I would like to see in a final reparations plan is not only cash compensation, but I would also like to see remedies that are tailored to address the disadvantages that the Freedman community has had to suffer in California. And that would include the establishment of an office or a reestablished office such as the Freedmen's Bureau for the purposes of addressing the badges of slavery that continue to present day, and possibly a political body focused on addressing the reoccurring disparities that plague descendants within the California community.
Kylie, next line. Thank you.
We'll go to line number 62. Matthew, your line is open.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Matthew Morris. I'm a Hawthorne, California native and a descendant of Technical Sergeant Joseph Louis Barrow, also known as the heavyweight champion of the world, Joe Louis. I will state in my opinion that the start of this harm occurred in 1619 and continues to this day based on there still being survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre. Surely their pain and suffering still matters and is still having a hold over their life after surviving what I would call a terrorist act. So first off, let me remind this task force that reparations are to be an apology. And let me define that quickly, that reparations, by defined, are the making of amends for a wrong one has done by paying money to or otherwise helping those who have been wronged. And then lastly, I want to say that this is also a matter of accountability. Accountability is defined as the fact or condition of being accountable, responsibility. So again, to remind people that Ms. Fletcher, Mr. Van Ellis, and Ms. Randall are still living survivors of a terrorist act that occurred in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Reparations cannot be denied. It must surely be affirmed. And if you give it to Japanese descendants, if you give it to Native Americans, if you give it to Native Hawaiians, if you give it to other groups.
We really appreciate it. And Kylie, next speaker. Thank you.
Line 29.
Yes, good morning. My name is LaDonna Williams. I'm a descendant of enslaved and freedmen Reuben Downing and Elias Downing. I am making these requests that Black Americans be made a protected class immediately, that immediate payments of $5 million per person per Black American harmed through chattel slavery. I am also asking that you shorten this study and get on with the order of redress and reparations immediately. I am also asking that you respect the public and our input, because at the end of the day, this impacts us, that you give us more time to be able to communicate. You say that you value our time and our input, then please allow adequate time. An hour for those of us on the phone, an hour for those in person. You can cut down the amount of time. We've heard thousands of hours of you all talking. Then this is a collective effort. You need to give us that respect. We've got over 400 years of evidence that shows we don't need additional studies and all these additional meetings till 2024. All these other populations have stepped ahead of us and taken these millions.
The task force hears you. Thank you so much. Kylie?
Line 27, your line is open.
Hi, my name is Antoinette Johnson. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes,
Hello?
you can.
Yes. Oh, great. Hi, my name is Antoinette Johnson. I'm calling from Los Angeles, and I'm an activist for ancestral justice. I was born in 1960, and my lineage goes back to Cato, Louisiana. We are Choctaw, and that Cato, Louisiana is historically one of the places where the most lynchings have taken place. So it's also extremely important that my ancestors were not African American. That wording needs to be changed. They're not African American, nor am I African American. We are Indigenous or Aboriginal American Indians. And that is also stated in the 1965 Civil Rights Act. It was the Indian Act. So it is extremely important that we change that wording. We are not African Americans. Thank you for letting me speak.
She dropped some fire right there.
We'll go next to line 28.
Yes, hello, my name is Elita Robinson, and thank you for having this Reparations Task Force. I want to mention that I believe that there's a hidden history. I know that the date is 1619, which is pretty popular, but there's something with 1555. And so I think we've been going through this for over 460 years. Having said that, I think the cash payments, I'm hoping that when you guys hand this in next year during the summer, that it's a turnaround time of 48, maybe 72 hours before the checks are in the mail, given that America has proven that they can give out the money almost immediately to other people besides us. And so I hope that that is pushed for. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for setting this up, and then also to keep us aware that while we're doing our meetings, do know that there are others doing theirs and how they can dissipate and upend whatever we come to decide is best for us. So we just definitely need to keep this lineage based and know that not only are we meeting, but there's a power greater than ourselves that is also meeting and working on our behalf. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Chair Moore, it's about 10:01. We have time for a couple more commenters before we get to 10:05.
I know they're not doing this bull after extending the time for the live
We'll go to
people.
line number 7. Angela, your line is open. Line 7.
Thank you and good morning. This is Angela Nirvana. In a Newsweek article dated 12/8/22, some experts are concerned that the current language of the eligibility criteria might open the door for individuals identifying as white to possibly receive reparations. Dr. Darity states, if this is the complete language of the eligibility criteria, it's possible that an individual who's not living as a Black person in the U.S. or somebody whose ancestors endured slavery abroad might be eligible. Ms. Taifa and white folks said that white folks proving lineage based on rape of Black women and children might be eligible. Mr. Lewis said the person claiming eligibility based upon lineage has to prove they've been harmed by the lingering effects of slavery. How do we prove it? For example, how do American freedmen prove discrimination in hiring practices because we don't speak Spanish or simply because we're Black? How do we prove our salaries aren't commensurate with immigrants and whites when we aren't privy to what our co-workers earn? Ms. Taifa said eligibility should include Black individuals who suffered discrimination in California up until 1965, which excludes those of us currently living out the vestiges of the harms outlined in the 500-page prelim report, and those of us who've been legislated out of the state due to unemployment and underemployment year to date. She goes on to reintroduce race-based reparations for Black immigrants who suffered Jim Crow. Translation, Black immigrants who chose to flee their Holocaust to tether themselves to our never-ending Holocaust, even though the government at every branch has chosen to bury us in immigration, making them more American than us with our vote, our affirmative action, and our reparations.
To the weekend as well to broaden engagement, and that there be a move to introduce legislation that can implement some of the recommendations that were lined out in the report. Also, when we talk about disparities and harm, we must include the part state officials played.
Sick of the bullshit!
Structural and political racism of the day that we are still fighting to come up from under. Have to be part of the conversation. Redlining, eminent domain, lack of educational resources, inadequate housing, food insecurities, limited employment, business opportunities, limited state contracting for Black businesses steeped from the effects of racist laws and racist practices that have never been removed nor countered head on and continue to do harm today. I implore you to ask our government and elected officials what they are doing to right the harms and address the reparative justice, and address the reparative justice piece that has been the topic of discussion for decades. We got to look at too, when we have these conversations, y'all, let's give time for everyone to have space, everyone to speak. If we have it lined up enough time.
Speakers of the morning, Kaylee?
Yes. We'll go to line 23.
Hello, my name is Mecca Morgan, and I'm a real estate broker licensed in the state of California. I am incredibly grateful for the Reparations Task Force and all of their hard work. I would like to encourage everyone listening today to Google Demand Letter 2018. It was published in the San Francisco Bayview newspaper. That's Demand Letter 2018. There you will find a concrete proposal as to what reparations, restitution, and restoration should be. Anything less is uncivilized. Thank you very much.
We'll go next to line 53.
Hello, my name is Chandra Al-Mansour, native of Oakland, born 1965, descendant of Gurley and Orly Sweeney, came to the Bay Area in 1945. I agree the meeting should be on Fridays and Saturdays for more attendance and accessibility. I'm also the executive director of the Housing Rights Center located in Los Angeles. We have documented decades of discrimination against Blacks in California, housing discrimination, redlining, gentrification. The impact is still ongoing. COVID also it just amplified that as well. And I believe also cash and access to interest-free capital is what's necessary in terms of the actual reparations, and the reparations should be intentional in terms of for Blacks with lineage-based eligibility through California as well. And I believe also that the comments should be made public. I know that they will be, but the written comments should also be accepted as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kaylee. That will conclude our comments this morning. Thank you for your assistance. And
I'm just angry as hell that they cut my 3 minutes off because they chose to extend the time for the people that are there. It's grossly unfair. I'm sick of the bullshit. Our people are being extincted.
We're not able to be heard.
I'm sick of it.
Tomorrow, or you're welcome.
I've been up since 5 this morning crafting these 3 minutes.
Written comments to reparations task force at doj.ca.gov. Thank you again. And
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Aisha.
I'm going to take this off speaker, and I got to go for a walk. And so y'all have to turn up your volume. I got to take it off Bluetooth because it's not synced, okay? It's not synced with the people speaking, so I'm going to take it off Bluetooth. Turn up your volumes or turn on your Bluetooth. I got to go to the beach right now. I'll listen live from my phone and keep it going here on the stream. I need a breath.
Adversely impacted in terms of participation. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. The minutes from the September 22 task force meeting were sent to task force members with materials.
Just tired,
I'm going to disconnect the phone. So at this point, are there any questions, comments, or corrections regarding the minutes?
I'll talk so that folks who are watching virtually aren't adversely impacted in terms of participation. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. The minutes from the September 22 task force meeting were sent to task force members with materials, and we've all had a chance to review them. So at this point, are there any questions, comments, or corrections regarding the minutes? And if not, to accept the minutes.
I know how difficult they are, and you do a great job. There is a small matter, but it's an important one to correct. It's on page 16. It has to do with the testimony of Mia Iwataki, whose mother was imprisoned in a concentration camp, and her father served in the, and this is a correction, 442nd Regimental Combat Team. It was a segregated Japanese American unit, not Japanese from Japan, American citizens who volunteered out of the camps to become part of that most decorated unit to this day in the history of the Army. And so I just want to make that correction, 442nd and Japanese American Army unit. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd just like to say the minutes are a team effort while I work on them. But there are other staff as well. But thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, are there any other corrections? If not, we can entertain a motion. Okay, it has been properly moved by Senator Bradford. Is there a second on the motion? It's been properly seconded by Assembly Member Reggie Jones Sawyer to approve the September 22 minutes, but correct them to incorporate the correction that Member Tamaki just raised. Is there any discussion on the matter? Okay, hearing no further discussion, we will vote. The vote will be by roll call. Parliamentarian Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will begin with Chair Moore.
Aye.
Chair Moore votes aye. Vice Chair Brown? Not present. Member Bradford? Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills? Member Grills votes aye. Member Holder? Member Holder votes aye. Member Jones Sawyer? Member Jones Sawyer votes aye. Member Lewis?
Aye.
Member Lewis votes aye. Member Montgomery Stepp?
Aye.
Member Montgomery Stepp votes aye. Member Tamaki?
Aye.
Member Tamaki votes aye. Madam Chair, there were 8 members present and voting. There were 8 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson and task force members. The vote was 8 ayes and 0 nays. The ayes have it and the motion carries. The minutes are approved as corrected. Thank you, Member Tamaki, for raising that correction. So the next item on the agenda is number 4, discussion and potential action, advisory committee report on recommended answers to the economic consultant experts 5 key questions. The presenters for this hearing will be, for this part of the agenda will be myself, Member Jovan Scott Lewis. I also want to take into account, oh great, we have our esteemed economic consultant team with us, particularly Professor Casey Campbell and Professor Thomas Kramer, who will be available to answer any questions throughout this discussion. Before we get to agenda item 4, I do have some housekeeping, thanks to Parliamentarian Johnson, about how the remainder of today's hearing and tomorrow's hearing will go, because over these next 2 days, we'll be hearing from advisory committees, pretty much reporting back on the work that they've been doing over the past 2 months. We've been kind of in our silos, working on what could be potential final recommendations that will be in our final report, July 1, 2023. And so there are certain, in terms of procedure, I just want to remind task force members that when the advisory committee reports on redressing the harms delineated in report 1, any motion made will need to clearly state the directions that they are giving the DOJ staff. So, for example, specifically state they approve the proposed preliminary recommendations as presented, amended, and that they be returned to the DOJ staff for refinement, finalization, and preparation for presentation and vote during the January task force meeting. Or you can say if they want an amendment to any part of the recommended proposals, if they want to delete part of the proposal or add language, they will have to amend it before the vote is taken. I will return back to this procedure, but for the purposes of time, let's get to the actual presentation. And then after we go through the presentation, I think the procedure will be more clear. So let's just get to the presentation. Okay, so while we get our presentation up, just to frame the conversation, if we could, Professor Kramer or Professor Casey Campbell, can you remind the members of the public and the task force why you are seeking the task force's recommendations on the 5 key questions that you all brought up? Good morning. Yes. Oh, we're kind of. Bring the mic down.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. To give some context related to this part of the agenda, the expert group has put together a scope of work that deals specifically with the harms or atrocities related to slavery as an institution and the process of reparations. In order to delineate each atrocity or harm that we outlined at the last meeting, there were a couple of frameworks that were needed to provide calculations that would be appropriate for the 5 different harms that we had identified as unjust property takings by eminent domain, the devaluation of Black businesses, housing discrimination and houselessness, disproportionate Black mass incarceration and over-policing, and health harms. The questions are specific to provide calculations that operationalize and allow us to give figures related to these particular harms or atrocities. There are frameworks that allow us to give these estimates that identify either a process or processes related to the harms. And again, as I said earlier, it is a way for us to quantify the burdens associated with the institution of slavery, the harms or atrocities that we have identified that continue, that historically have been burdensome and continue to be burdensome. So it's to provide calculations or to provide actual numerical values so that we can be able to have a conversation about what it looks like when we put all of this together.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Professor Campbell. So now we can go to the next slide where we will summarize the 5 framing questions concerning potential compensation. So the first question is, what are the damage timeframes? This becomes even more important for the prioritization of African American descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. Are the damage timeframes 1865 to 1960? This is a question that the economists have posed to the task force, and the advisory committee that comprises of myself and Jovan have started to explore what could be recommended answers to these questions. The second question is, will there be a California residency requirement? A lot of members of the public are wondering what are the rules around whether there will be a residency requirement. This is the question that the economists have also asked the task force to contemplate. If there is a residency requirement, how will it be determined? Member Jovan Scott Lewis and I have begun to explore recommended answers for that question as well. Number 3, what year determines the beginning of harm? Are there different starting points and endpoints for each atrocity category? We'll go on and explore that question as well. The 4th question, will direct victims and/or all African American descendants of U.S. slavery in California who meet the residency requirement be compensated? And the 5th question the economic consultant team has asked the task force to consider is, how will reparations be paid and measured to ensure the form of payment aligns with the estimate of damages? So after me and member Jovan Scott Lewis explore these questions, we'll then turn to the task force for questions and discussions and potential responses to the economic consultant's questions. Next slide. So again, this is just added context, basically what Professor Casey Campbell has stated. This is from the economic consultant scope of work document. So again, as Professor Campbell has stated, the expert group has identified 5 harms or atrocities the state of California should compensate. From that list, the expert group has selected 5 calculations. The methodology to calculate damages associated with each of the categorized harms and atrocities will be developed by the expert group, subject to be approved by the task force. And again, to recap, the 5 atrocities the economic consultant team has identified for potential reparations in the form of compensation are unjust property takings by eminent domain, devaluation of Black businesses, housing discrimination and houselessness, disproportionate Black mass incarceration and over-policing, and health harms. So while the expert group has identified 5 harms and atrocities it believes can be modeled with existing data, there will be ongoing communication with the expert team and the task force to provide analysis related to the direct fiscal redress and or other forms of reparations, and the interim report with conversations between the task force and the expert team around costs, impact, and remedies to harms and atrocities. It is anticipated that the task force will later suggest various remedies in response to the models, and the expert team will assess how those proposed remedies compare to the estimated harms. Next slide, please. Again, before we get to the 5 questions, this is additional context. Next slide, please. So for those who are wondering why compensation, if you look at the statute AB 3121, it mandates that our final recommendations must comport with international human rights law standards. And on this slide, this shows the UN General Assembly's right to remedy for reparations under international law. And as we've learned time and time again, under international law, there are 5 forms of reparations: rehabilitation, restitution, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. But compensation is also a necessary element. And so we are mandated by statute to consider what potential compensation might look like. Next slide, please. And again, compensation, according to the United Nations, compensation should be provided for any economically accessible damage as appropriate and proportional to the gravity of the violation and the circumstances of each case, resulting from gross violations of international human rights law and serious violations of international humanitarian law, such as physical or mental harm, which is why health harms is identified coincidentally, lost opportunities, including employment, education, and social benefits, material damages and loss of earnings, including loss of earning potential, moral damages, and costs required for legal or expert assistance, medicine and medical services, and psychological and social services. So again, that is from the UN General Assembly's right to remedy and reparation for victims of gross violations of international human rights law. Next slide. So we are going to get into the 5 questions soon, but again, for added context, the tenets of the model, this came from the economic consultant team, and we will explore this further in our presentation. The tenets of the model goes as, first, the community of eligibility, which in March we confirmed to be lineage-based. And then we will consider what, again, the damage timeframes might be, and then whether there are residency requirements. And again, to summarize, the 5 atrocities that the economic consultant teams have identified are unjust property takings by eminent domain, the evaluation of Black businesses, housing discrimination and houselessness, disproportionate Black mass incarceration, and over-policing and health harms. Next slide. Again, for further added context, I pulled some statutory provisions from AB 3121 that corresponds with the tenets of the model, starting with eligibility. So these 2 slides correspond with who is eligible. So by virtue of the statute, The task force is required to identify, compile, and synthesize the relevant corpus of evidentiary documentation of the institution of slavery that existed within the United States and the colonies that became the United States from 1619 to 1865 inclusive. The task force documentation and examination shall include the facts related to all of the following: the federal and state laws that discriminated against formerly enslaved Africans and their descendants who were deemed United States citizens from 1868 to present; the other forms of discrimination in the public and private sectors, again, against freed African slaves and their descendants who were deemed United States citizens from 1868 to the present, including redlining, educational funding discrepancies, and predatory financial practices. And then the statute also mandates the task force to study what form of compensation should be awarded, through what instrumentalities, and who should be eligible for such compensation. Thank you. Next slide. And again, as further context, the community of eligibility, as the economic consultant team has indicated in their scope of work document, has defined by the task force is lineage-based and includes individuals who are descended from at least one African American chattel enslaved person or the direct descendant of a free Black person who lived in the United States prior to the end of the 19th century. So now that we have gone through the context in terms of what the tenets of potential compensation might look like, which is based on eligibility, time, and residency, let's begin to explore the 5 key questions the economic consultant team asked the task force to resolve. Next slide. So the first question the economic consultant team asked the task force to resolve are, what are the damage time frames, right? So we just went through eligibility, but now we have to talk about time. What are the damage time frames? This becomes even more important for the prioritization of African American descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. Next slide. So this slide just illustrates examples of unjust property takings in the state of California as it has impacted African Americans, which include, for example, as we all know, the Bruces and the unjust property taken of their beachfront property in Manhattan Beach. Next slide. Okay, and so in terms of information that we know around unjust property takings, this is from the economic consultant team. The data that they have now is that, for instance, you know, how do I say this? For instance, when we talk about unjust property takings, bridges, transportation networks, water systems, wastewater treatment systems, dams, water mains. When the state of California built these infrastructures, they built it on top of land that was owned by minorities, including African Americans. And so I don't know if we want to go to Casey Campbell or Thomas Kramer to talk about very, very briefly about the data that we already have as it relates to unjust property takings.
Online, is she online? I don't know if.
Okay. Well, it's fine.
If not, I just very briefly, for unjust property takings, this is probably one of the areas where the data itself is very limited. What we have available so far is just what you outlined, these major projects related to actions from the California government, these specific takings and what that looks like, and to kind of go through the time period for individuals or for communities. So far, we don't have a lot of data associated with that. So that's probably one of the main issues in terms of What we have so far, not a lot. What we need is quite a bit of micro and macro level data to kind of calculate some of these.
Exactly. Thank you so much. In terms of further research needed, as indicated by the economists, we need to have a better understanding of when eminent domain was instituted, by and large, which has impacted African Americans, who lost their property, what was paid for those properties. There's a lot of unknowns. But in working to resolve the question, again, this is the beginning of the development stage. So we have 6 more months to continue to resolve this work for our final report, which will be released July 1 of next year. But again, me and Jovan Scott Lewis, as members of this particular advisory committee, have taken upon ourselves to try to resolve the question around what is the damage time frame for potential compensation regarding unjust property takings with the data that the economists have gathered thus far. And so the suggested potential action for the task force is that we need to continue to have a conversation about this. We need to continue to allow the economists to gather the data that they need. But for the purposes of moving the conversation along, we have come up with a preliminary suggested damage time frame based on existing research. So what that means is we are preliminary suggesting that the damage time frames for reparations in the form of compensation for unjust property takings for the community of eligibility should be 1920 to present. Do you want to mention why we chose 1920?
Sure. So we're doing our best to effectively track the history of eminent domain use in the state of California. We're at the moment looking at a kind of broad. Can you not hear me? I see Rafael. Oh, really? All right. Let me try this. So the time frame really is largely based upon, as Chair Moore noted, as Dr. Campbell noted, really a dearth of available data. And so right now what we're looking at, almost in an anecdotal way, is the kind of history of eminent domain in the state. And so that places us, roughly around this time, but also trying to give some account to what we do know as the kind of public history or the records of the public history of African-American land ownership in the state. So what that means is that we know that African-Americans, members of the eligible community, own property in the state of California prior to 1920, right? We've heard stories of, eminent domain being used on communities and on families who've owned property in the state almost from the beginning of the state's inception into the union. So for the moment, where we feel most secure is starting roughly around 1920. I think, if we are able to determine how we can go about collecting, more refined data, then we will, obviously modify that time frame. I think what we are for sure, very certain about is that this is an ongoing atrocity and ongoing harm, and so we're very confident about the end date being currently open until the issuing of reparations for unjust property takings. But at the moment, we're starting with 1920. I think, Dr. Campbell, Dr. Kramer, I would love for us to, I think, have a better sense of what the mechanisms that the task force can provide for finding out better data. I think we need to have a very specific set of guidances based upon where we think this data might be accessible, how the task force might be able to use what powers it has to acquire this data. I think it's very apt that we do have representatives, with us over these 2 days from local municipalities, etc., because a lot of those records are held locally. So it would be good, I think, for furthering this particular issue, if we can work together to determine where exactly we might be able to find this information so that we can provide a more refined and more accurate time frame.
Briefly ask a clarification question. You said 1920 to the present. For the purposes of the report, how should we define the term present? Would that be 2021 or 2022 or 2023. It depends on whether we will have data for that year as well.
Right. I mean, and so we are limited by data in every instance. I mean, I think across all of the reports that we'll hear from the task force today and tomorrow, we will see that data is the number one issue that's limiting our ability, or that might limit our ability to provide, you know, really clear guidance at this point. So of course, right, we're in 2022, right? But if we're thinking about the last census, if we're thinking about, you know, when there might have been the last accounting, we may be thinking about, you know, years prior to now, right? You know, the data might be available only up until, say, 2018. So we are talking about the present being indicated by the most recent and updated data available, whenever that might be. And it's unfortunate, right? Because we think the present in different ways, but it's about what's available.
Okay, great. So again, just to recap, the suggested preliminary damage time frame based on existing research for reparations in the form of compensation for unjust property takings is 1920 to present. There's still work to qualify what that means in terms of present. Next slide, please. So the next atrocity category that the economists have identified is devaluation of Black businesses. These graphics come from our interim report, which we talked about the devaluation of Black businesses quite a lot. And so, for instance, there is data to show that in terms of business ownership by race, in 2004, 81% of businesses in the United States were owned by white Americans, while only 3.5% of businesses were owned by Black Americans, while Black Americans make up over 13% of the US population. Also, the interim report goes on to say, Black business owners typically start their businesses with half of the capital of white business owners, despite the fact that they demonstrate a greater need for startup financing. The median loan amount for Black business owners who are approved for credit is less than half of the loan amounts extended to their white counterparts. Next slide. So again, the economic consultant team has asked the task force to consider what is the damage time frame for potential compensation regarding devaluation of Black businesses. Again, there is, you know, data that the economic consultant teams already have, but there's still data that they still need to seek out. I don't know if you want to speak to this really briefly, or we can just move forward on that.
This is also another category in terms of data, just the paucity of data points related to calculating damages or linking the atrocity of the devaluation of Black businesses. One issue the expert group has been going through is not only data, but also methodology, where we look specifically at is it lost profits, or is it the case of the government causing harm? And if that's the case, maybe the argument should be looking specifically at the government contracting process. The data that you just showed in terms of Black ownership, Black versus white ownership of businesses, we would expect probably a similar gap as it relates to awarding contracts that determine profitability, which comes from the government when we look at white versus Black. So we wanted to figure out a way to operationalize the government causing harm to Black businesses, which would probably be through the government contracting process. The members of the audience and the Black community knows very well that process is tainted and slanted to the point where the awarding of contracts by race is one where we see Black individuals, even based on the same qualifications, getting applications in on time, following all the processes, there is still a huge disparity that exists in terms of getting these contracts awarded to Black businesses. So that was one way we were thinking of one, the data might be readily available, and also it speaks specifically to the California government harm to the business process. That's where our conversation has been in terms of operationalizing this category. It's not a easy category to quantify. So methodology and data limitations are issues related to calculations for this harm or atrocity.
Thank you so much for that explanation and clarification. So again, there is definitely further research that is needed. So that is a suggested potential action that the task force just recommends further research on this, so that there are no final determinations around damage timeframes coming out of this hearing today. But again, the advisory committee has worked on coming up with a preliminary suggested date damage timeframe based on the existing research. And for the evaluation of Black businesses, we chose 1900 to correspond with the lineage requirement that we came to in March to present. And then there's obviously a need to qualify what present means. We put in parentheses AB 3121, so present could be when Governor Gavin Newsom enacted AB 3121 into law, which is September 30th, 2020. But again, there's still more discussion that needs to happen amongst the task force to gain consensus around the suggested damage timeframes. And also for the purposes of note taking for task force, just focus on like what's highlighted in yellow, and we will summarize these damage timeframes later. Housing discrimination and homelessness is the third atrocity category. Next slide, please. So again, these graphics come from our amazing interim report written by and compiled by California DOJ attorneys in the civil rights section. So for instance, you'll find in our chapter on housing discrimination that less than 1% of federal housing administration loans went to Black people in Northern California from 1946 to 1960. Also, by 1940, 80% of homes in Los Angeles contained restrictive covenants barring Black families. And here is a map of a homeowner's loan corporation redlining map of Oakland in 1937. Next slide. Again, these are graphics from our interim report. To the left is a picture of William Bailey and Roger Duncan from Los Angeles, California. They're looking at the wreckage in Bailey's living room after a bomb exploded in the house. Duncan's house directly across the street was also bombed at the same time, and a note was left threatening all the Black families on the street in LA if they did not move out, and that was in 1952. Also, another graphic from our report, Black Californians make up 6% of the California population, but we make up 40% of the unhoused population. Next slide, please. So again, the economic consultant team has asked us to consider what the damage timeframes for potential compensation for housing discrimination and homelessness. For this particular category, I think there is much more data than the others, and particularly for housing discrimination. I'll allow the economic consultant team to talk about that if they like. They've identified a period between 1937 and 1977, but then there's still more research that's needed to figure out what could compensation be for houselessness. So I want to just give you all an opportunity or space to speak on either of those two parts.
Can you hear me? Yeah. The question of homelessness or houselessness is more difficult to answer and to estimate. So maybe we can view it as an outcome of housing discrimination and focus on estimating housing discrimination, which is easier because more data is available. And I would say from the public comment section this morning, there were some comments, why does this end in 1977? This seems to be arbitrary because discrimination went on. I think we have to be clear that this is about our task as experts to identify harms that were directly caused by the state of California, and the fact that California participated in redlining, which was in the federal law, but the federal law allowed the states great license to do whatever they want, so they could have counteracted the effects of anti-Black discrimination in home loans. I'm not sure if Holk, I'm not sure where the beginning year 1937 is coming from. I thought Holk was founded in 1933. So that's something that I would need some more guidance on. But basically we can compare the entire housing stock that was in the hands of Black Americans in California in 1930 census, that's 3 years before Holk was founded, to the entire housing stock that was in Black Californian hands in 1988, in the 1980 census, that's 3 years after the Community Reinvestment Act banned redlining. And that is the time period that California could have prevented redlining and did not. So I think that's an explanation that would hopefully make it clear to the commenter this morning why in 1977. Of course, discrimination went on, but we need data to estimate that, and that becomes more complicated. Yeah, so
Pause to recognize Vice Chair Brown. Thank you. So go ahead.
excuse me.
Go.
Yeah, so with that, basically, we can compare the housing, the total value of housing that was available in Black Californian hands to the total housing value that was available in white Californians' hands, and calculate the difference and come up with an estimate of what was lost to Black Californians, and based on that, compensation could be paid out. Thank you.
You. I think also this would be an opportune time to clear up any misinformation that came out in the press earlier this month around the fabrication that the task force has made any recommendations, final recommendations, let alone final recommendations that have monetary figures. So there was, some headlines saying that the task force recommended, $223,239 or $5,000 for each year between 1933 and 1977 for all African Americans in the state, which is not true. These are figures that came from the economic consultant team as estimates of California's maximum liability for housing discrimination, racist redlining practice, if in fact all Black people so happen to be eligible. And so I just wanted to also provide an opportunity for the economic consultant team to clear up anything around that as well.
These were preliminary calculations, so that is the first point. And then as they were calculating the maximum liability if every Black Californian were eligible, which may not be the case, and that's just data we don't have yet. And a third point is that I think, as I understand our role as experts, we are calculating what the losses were to African Americans. That is quite distinct from the question what should be compensated, which is for the task force to determine. And sometimes not the full amounts are paid, depending on negotiations. That's a political question that we as an expert team can't answer. So for us, it's estimating the losses to Black Californians and putting a figure on that. And these were preliminary figures, and they shouldn't be taken out of context.
Thank you so much, Professor Kramer. I want to take a pause to recognize California Assembly Member Mia Bonta, who has came today to give some remarks. Thank you so much, Assembly Member Bonta, for your presence. I want to take a pause to see if you would like to share any thoughts at this time. Everyone.
Thank you so much. I wanted to welcome you to our district AD18 and the Reparations Task Force for the work that you all are doing. You are in the home of the Black Panthers. You are in the home of where Oscar Grant came and lived and was killed. You are in the home of where 40% of our Black community has been displaced over the last 10 years. And you are in the home where many Black businesses did not survive after COVID. I thank you for the work that you all are doing. I want to appreciate and acknowledge my colleagues in the legislature, the Honorable Senator Bradford, as well as the Honorable Reggie Jones Sawyer, and the work that you all do every single day to make sure that we can ensure that in our Black community, we are actually addressing head-on the atrocities and harms that have been committed for far too long in the state of California and in this nation. So thank you for your work. We appreciate what you all are doing. We know that you are digging in to every single last detail and taking much of your time and energy to be able to do that. You heard from our advocates, our leaders, our inspirations and our aspirations in public comment today. And I want to thank the public for coming out and speaking their truths to keep us centered and grounded in the work that you all are doing.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member Mia Bonta, for your invaluable comments and service to the state of California. Now we will turn to conclude on housing discrimination and homelessness. As the economic consultant team has stated, there's definitely more further research needed in terms of houselessness and even to a certain extent housing discrimination. But the suggested potential action item again is further research is needed and or to codify the damage timeframes given to us by the economic consultant team, which is 1933, the beginning of HOPE, to 1977, which was the Community Reinvestment Act. Next slide, please. So the next damage or atrocity category that the economic consultant team has identified for potential compensation, for potential reparation in the form of compensation, is mass incarceration and over-policing. Again, these are graphics from our interim report. African Americans are 3 times more likely to be killed by the police. More than half of all killings by police in the U.S. go unreported in the USA National Vital Statistics System database, from which some analysis is drawn. Also, federal and state governments chose to punish drug users during the war on drugs rather than offer medical help. The war on drugs, which continues today, is a cause for the high numbers of imprisoned African Americans, as evidence exists to suggest that African Americans use drugs at approximately the same rate or even less than white Americans. Next slide. So I would like to turn to the economic consultant team to provide a rationale on the data that's needed, the data that already exists in terms of potential reparations in the form of compensation for mass incarceration and over policing. Again, the potential action item that we are asking the task force to decide today is that further research is needed. But based on the existing research that the economic consultant team has provided, they have stated that that the damage timeframes for reparations in the form of compensation for mass incarceration should be 1970, which was the start of the war on drugs, to present. And again, there's work to qualify what the present actually means. And then for over policing, the economic consultant team suggested the damage time frame for potential compensation for over policing should also be 1970 or 1971 to present. And then this is very interesting because based on the economic consultant's rationale, law enforcement was directed at the entire African American community and therefore affects all Black Californian descendants of the enslaved in the United States who lived in the state during the war on drugs, roughly coinciding with the 1970-2020 timeframe. So what that suggests to me when we were thinking about it is that you could be eligible for reparations in the form of compensation for mass incarceration and over policing, even if you weren't incarcerated for drugs, right? Just because you were African American and you were living in that environment where you could be over policed, you could be rounded up, you could be stopped and frisked, and therefore you were harmed in that universe of harm. So I wanted to give an opportunity for you all to discuss that rationale.
The idea that all Black Californians were affected by over policing is due to the fact that the war on drugs was directed in Black communities, and if you lived in a community like that, even if you personally were not arrested or incarcerated, still the quality of policing was lower. For example, one would imagine that people would be less likely to cooperate with law enforcement if they perceive them as an occupying force. Therefore, regular crime fighting declines, and the neighborhood living conditions worsen, the property values drop, and so on. So it has a knock-on effect on property values, on intergenerational wealth as well. And therefore, we feel that that all Black Californians should be entitled to receive reparations for over-policing directed at Black communities.
Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to my fellow colleagues of this august body. First of all, I want to apologize for being late in coming. I have a good excuse. Unfortunately, I was infected with this bug, COVID. Thanks be to God that through my having been vaccinated and booted and doing all the right things and having the right prescription from the doctor, after a 4-day quarantine period, I'm able to be here this morning. And I just got certified this morning that I'm all right. But the one thing I want to mention in connection with this incarceration is that we will speak to this later in the health report, but the health department has been culpable in causing harm to us. Why? Because they did not provide any kinds of services to make sure that we receive treatment. And just last night, while waiting for my certification, I happened to see on CNN where, unfortunately, there was this mother in another state who received all kinds of attention about her son, unfortunately, dying of fentanyl. Bright young man. But when the drugs were coming into the Black community, no senators, no representatives of legislative bodies and cities did anything to say that Black folks deserved having medical services to deal with a drug problem. This is another indication that this task force is a crackerjack task force and has done the quality, responsible job of verifying the harms, of presenting the facts. And these are no alternative facts. But we know that we have a charge to keep. And this task force will not be deterred. We will not be thrown off track by any of those negative forces out there who are tried recently, even about this bogus projection of that $200,000 plus fee coming to the Black community, without this body having voted officially on such. So thank you, Madam Chair, for providing me this opportunity, but I just could not resist not saying it since Brother Don and I have been working on health and education, but this is one glaring area, I repeat again, where it was a matter of not what they did, but the neglect. And they did absolutely nothing to make sure that Black folks receive quality treatment programs in local cities, in the state. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Brown. So before we move on to the last atrocity category, just to summarize again, in terms of the economic rationale, the damage time frame for mass incarceration and over-policing should be beginning with the start of the war on drugs to present. Member Javon Scott Lewis, do you have any thoughts on? Okay, so we can move to health harms. So the last category, next slide, is on health harms. Again, this is data and graphics from our historic interim report. Compared to white Californians, Black Californians are exposed to 40% more particulate matter from cars, trucks, and buses. Compared to other Americans, African Americans are 75% more likely to live near hazardous waste or refining facilities. Also, redlined and segregated Black neighborhoods were cheaper for polluting industries to build on. This became a downward spiral. The more garbage dumps and sewer treatment plants a neighborhood had, the cheaper the land was, and the more likely that other polluting industries would move in. And again, these are just a sample of the health harms that have plagued the African American community in the state of California. Next slide, please. So according to the economic consultants, Black people have been sicker and died younger than white people. Disproportionate disadvantageous health outcomes can be calculated by differences in life expectancy for Black and white Americans, a measure of excess Black mortality. Disparities in illness and morbidity correlate with higher death rates among Black Americans during the adult years. This even affects Black children. According to our report, Black children are 3 times more likely to have elevated levels in their blood. So before I move on, I just wanted to provide some space if the economic consultant team has any preliminary thoughts about this category they want to share.
Yeah, the health harms categories, as you mentioned, is one way to kind of operationalize or quantify the burdens associated with just negative health outcomes on the Black population that is younger, have higher mortality rates associated with every type of cancer we can think of, low birth rates, issues dealing with mortality for children. So one way to kind of get a value associated with these burdens on the Black population become quantified with us dying younger. And once we look at that gap between the life expectancy of Black versus white, we're able to put all of these health harms, or to quantify that particular gap allows us to give a value associated with the health harms, is the idea behind the methodology. It also allows for us to have a greater conversation around some of what we heard from the public today associated with not just cancer or diabetes or blood pressure, but the stress of being Black in these communities, the color of your skin, even without having a particular health outcome, being burdensome within itself. How we quantify that is a greater conversation, but we think allowing for the differences in life expectancy will capture some of those issues associated with the stress of being Black in California. So this is why we chose this particular methodology to be able to come up with understanding or getting a value associated with the health harms.
Thank you, Professor Kramer. So again, the recommended potential action item is that further research is needed to gather the necessary data to make an estimate based on the life expectancy rate of Black African American Californians compared to white American Californians. But again, the advisory committee that comprises of myself and member Jovan Scott Lewis has started to get the ball rolling and determine potential suggested damage timeframes based on the existing research that we have. And we came up with 1900, which corresponds with the lineage decision that we made in March, which also acknowledges our African American elders to present. So next slide, the next slide will summarize what we just discussed, which is question 1. So again, the global recommendation from the advisory committee on these 5 key questions are that no final determinations on answers to question 1 come out of this hearing today, as there is further research needed, but we would appreciate any feedback, responses, so that we can come to consensus at a later date on the preliminary suggested timeframes for each atrocity category. And again, these are the 5 atrocity categories that the economic consultant team has stated that they have some data for to substantiate a claim for reparations in the form of compensation or cash payments. And those 5 categories are unjust property takings. I remember Jovan Scott Lewis, we came up with the preliminary suggested time frame to 1920 to present. Devaluation of Black businesses, 1900 to present. Housing discrimination and houselessness, 1933 to 1977, to correspond with HOKE and the Community Reinvestment Act, which marked the end of legal housing discrimination in the state of California. Mass incarceration and over policing, which would start at the beginning of the war on drugs to present, 1970 to present, and then health harms, 1900 to present.
Thank you, Chair Moore. So I want to just add a bit of clarification that, the 1900 start date, right, is effectively for the moment a placeholder, because we don't have, okay. So I'll repeat that just in case I wasn't heard. So right now, the 1900 start date in some of these areas indicates, I would argue, a kind of placeholder, because we don't yet have, data that helps to determine a kind of a verifiable start date for some of these harms. And so we are beginning with the period of eligibility following, right, the conclusion of slavery, and that period that we've identified that eligibility begins following slavery. So the issue for us, I think, is to work out how we can track down where to start. And so I think, with areas 1, 3, and 4, we have, I think, a pretty decent idea of exactly what the bracketed periods are. But it seems as if we still need to have, some further communication with the economics team as to how we can go about, start finding those start dates for those other areas. So again, I mentioned earlier, if you can provide some guidance as to where we can perhaps begin to look, right? And I understand that, part of your scope of work is not to go out there and find data for us, right? Your job is to analyze it, help us to determine how we can come up with a calculation. But again, we want to know, to what extent can the DOJ, can the task force and our respective, advisory groups go about doing the work of finding information for you. Related, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, but with issues of the wealth gap, right? We had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I hate to spoiler alert or whatever, but we don't yet know what the actual racial wealth gap in the state of California is, right? We don't know what that is. And so part of what we will hopefully be able to do over the course of the next few months is to engage with different entities to try and find out what we can. And so in the same vein, we want to kind of do that, right, with these with areas 2 and 5. And so if you can give us some kind of preliminary sense as to where we might look, what kind of resources will be necessary for you to begin, determining that period, that would be very helpful. And you don't have to answer now, but this is just in terms of what we're doing going forward, right? And it's important for the public to know that this is, the first time that we've all sat down to kind of figure out some of these questions. And so this is just a preliminary presentation over this today and tomorrow about what we really don't know, right? I mean, I think up until this moment, we did not really know what we didn't know. And now we have a good sense of what we do not know, and our jobs over the next few months is to determine how we can answer those questions. So if you could help us with those 2 areas going forward, that would be helpful.
Thank you. So we'll now turn to the second of the 5 key questions that the economic consulting team has asked the task force to consider, and that the advisory committee has started to come up with some preliminary responses. The first question was, the bulk of the presentation, so the rest should kind of speed through. But so next slide, please. So again, the question that the economic consulting team has asked us to consider is, will there be a California residency requirement for reparations in the form of compensation or cash payments? And if yes, how will it be determined? Next slide. And so these are some guiding questions that the advisory committee has come up with in terms of how do we determine California residency for the purposes of reparations in the form of compensation. How will residency be determined? What should be the cutoff date? And then also qualifying this question, what is the African American Californian experience? How can it be qualified? Is it qualified by significant historical events? Could it be qualified by collectively experiencing or suffering from state-sanctioned violence? Could it be qualified by collective organizing by the African American California community? And so this question is very kind of theoretical, but we will continue on with the presentation. Next slide, please. So again, what qualifies a California resident for the purpose of compensation? Again, this is a framing question. Should you have residency going all the way back to the gold rush? For instance, in the first test of California's fugitive slave law, 3 formerly enslaved Black men, including Robert Perkins, had built a lucrative mining supply business, and they were stripped of their freedom and deported back to Mississippi. And you can find more about this at ACLU Gold Chains Project. Also, Bridget Biddy Mason was brought as a slave to California. So again, just a very theoretical question. In terms of residency, should you have, familial connections going all the way back to the gold rush, for instance? We still have to figure that out. Next slide. Or should you have residency going all the way back to the California Black conventions? For instance, the Colored Citizens Convention in 1855 to 1865. Black migrants with hopes for a new start free of the barriers of white racism did not find a promised land awaiting them in California. Yet the rapid succession of 4 California state conventions indicates how quickly Black men and women began to work together toward their vision of achieving economic, civil, and human rights. As noted historian of the Black West, Quinter Taylor, has observed, The collective energy and creativity that African Americans poured into political organizing in California challenged stock images of rugged individualism of the American West. And to the right is a picture of, or a pamphlet of, the first state convention of the colored citizens of the state of California, which was held at Sacramento, November 20th, in 1855. Next slide, please. Or should your residency be determined if you have California connections dating back to 1912, when, for instance, the Bruces obtained their property in Manhattan Beach, or 1948, when West Oakland was encircled with freeways, physically dividing the primarily African American neighborhood and its residents from the rest of the city. Next slide, please. Yes.
I think we have others that are supposed to make presentations. How long is this presentation?
Oh, if you look at the agenda, it's itemized until 11:30. It's 11:15.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't have them.
All right. The next part of the presentation, should residency requirement be dated to 1965, when we talk about collective suffering of the African American community? The Watts riots of 1965 were a series of violent confrontations between LA police and residents of Watts and other predominantly African American neighborhoods of South Central LA that began August 11th, 1965 and lasted 6 days. Next slide, please. Or what also qualifies the African American Californian experience? Should residency be, the cutoff date be around 1966, when the Black Panther Party was formed by Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton in Western Oakland? Next slide, please. Should the cutoff date be 1972, when we talk about collective suffering, collective uplift of the African American Californian community and experience? Should it be 1972 to commemorate Watts Stacks, which was the largest gathering of African Americans in one place since the Civil Rights March on Washington in 1963? Next slide, please. Or should the cutoff date be 1988, around the time where war on drugs was ravishing the entire Black community? And if you see this picture, there's Black men, Black women, Black elders, all being targeted and harassed. Next slide, please. Or should the cutoff date be 1992 to commemorate the LA uprisings? Next slide, please. So to summarize, will there be a California residency requirement? If yes, how will it be determined? The preliminary response from this advisory committee is that yes, there should be a California residency requirement, but there needs to be further discussion amongst the task force around a potential cutoff date. Again, you know, the factors for a potential cutoff date could be historical events associated with the California African American experience, like the Watts riots in 1965, the formation of the Black Panther Party in 1966, for instance. Potential implications of a cutoff date would mean potential claimants must be an individual or come from a family that moved to California at least 2 to 3 generations ago. Again, preliminary, how do you determine residency? We've come up with a list of different items, which include, which is not limited to voter registration records, car registration records, letters from homeless shelters and organizations, home utility bills, school documents, medical records, etc. Next slide, please. So the third question that we were asked to consider is, what year determines the beginning of harm? Are there different starting points and endpoints for each atrocity category? I'll turn to member Scott Lewis for the preliminary suggestions on that.
Okay, so I'm going to try to be quick because I know that within the time frame that we have, we also need to leave some time for discussion and consideration by the task force. So just to quickly summarize, what we're trying to work out is we have presented to us, from the economics team, that this atrocity model requires, for the purpose of their calculations, start and end dates. Within determining the residency, we have to then decide if we are going to be using something of a generalized condition, right, where all of these atrocities really are eligible for reparations or compensation-based reparations by all eligible community members who can determine residency, or would we then ask individuals to prove that they, in fact, were a resident given any given particular time frame of an atrocity? So what that means is, if we think about housing, we've established, I think, quite clearly 1933 to 1977 as being a kind of period of the atrocity around housing discrimination. So one model would then require for an individual to present some kind of documentation that they were a resident of the state of California during that period. And so what that means is that for every atrocity that we would be able to determine start and end dates for, individuals would then have to provide similar documentation that they were a resident at that time to then be eligible for compensation-based reparations. What Chair Moore just presented was, I think, an alternative model, which is that we can think about the history of atrocity in the state of California as being, and I think, Professor Kramer mentioned this as well, being, kind of a conditioning process, right? Where even if you were not necessarily, say victim to losing a business, actually the loss of that business in an African-American community, right, represents a harm to the whole community. And so on that basis, we could argue that that would be a model in which someone wouldn't necessarily need to present on a case-by-case basis their eligibility based upon residency. But we would have to find some other mechanism by which we could say you are, in fact, what we can consider a Black American Californian. And so that's really the challenge. And so this is why Chair Moore just presented these various moments in California's Black history around the history of discrimination to say, well, how do you have a relationship to that particular history as a means of defining and determining your residency? That is quite, I think, challenging in a way, but it is something that we could do if we did not want to go the path of, here are listed atrocities. You now need to determine that you were a California resident under, I think, existing terms of residency during that period. So what we're trying to figure out here with this third question, so what year determines the beginning of harm, right, in this more generalized condition? I think if we go the atrocity-based model, it's very easy to determine when harm begins, or at least we're getting there. I shouldn't say it's easy, I'm sorry. It's not easy at all, it's very difficult, but we're getting there. We've gotten 3 out of the 5 roughly estimated, 2 remaining. But if we go that atrocity-based model where an individual then need to provide some documentation indicating that they were resident during the period, we know what those start dates and end dates will be. However, if we go with a more generalized model, then we will have to, as a task force, decide, well, when do the harms start and when do they end? And then how does that then correlate with a means of determining one's residency? I should note, way back when we had Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber visit, we asked this question about residency, and the answer wasn't necessarily very prescriptive. I think at that time, what we heard from her was that the kind of normal terms of residency kind of stood. We would have to then decide if we want to do that. If we did that, then we would then have to decide, well, what are the, of these, say, called 2 models, what are the best means by which we can use normative determinants of residency within a reparations model? It might be the atrocity, the atrocity kind of framework. But if we wanted to go with a more generalized condition, right? Because to be fair, looking at these dates, you see this continuous onslaught of discrimination, of atrocity. They're almost like picking up and overlapping in these ways that are just horrifying. So we know that this is really a general condition of harm, but we would have to figure out when we decide that those harms begin in a way that the broad category of eligible persons would then be able to determine their residency and therefore be eligible for compensation. So that's just a brief overview of where we're at and what we have to kind of discuss. And I think, if you don't mind, Chair Moore, if we can maybe just, yeah.
This is the last 2. We gotta get through the last two. Go ahead, Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My colleagues, since we're talking about dates, I think we should establish the date as being when Peter Burnett put his feet on California soil and became the first governor of this state. He came here as an arch racist. He also introduced legislation to prohibit Black folks from settling in California. And that was a beginning point of harm. A public official, a policymaker of this state, and during the times of the arguments around that civil rights case of the West, 1857, of R.C. Lee, from my native state of Mississippi. That's when all of the harm started in this state, on this land. And also, we may have another date when that preacher, Allensworth, attempted to establish an educational institution. What happened in the state? Water was poisoned, railroad tracks were redirected, and all of this was directed against the welfare, education of Black folks. Well, he had in mind establishing a Tuskegee Institute of the West in 1908. So there's a whole lot that shows where they dropped indicators that they were against us because we were Black.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Brown. And so for the last two questions, I'll leave it to Member Jovan Scott Lewis to summarize. The fourth question: will direct victims and/or all African-American descendants of U.S. slavery in California who meet the residency requirement be compensated? So that's the next slide, please. And then the following slide is: how will reparations be paid and measured to ensure the form of payment aligns with the estimate of damages?
Thank you. And so that was the point that I was bringing up, right? Is that we have two choices really. So if we want for there to be this, again, this specific sense of a harm begins at this point and it ends at this point, and then we tie residency to that particular timeline of each atrocity, then what that means is that it almost necessarily limits compensation to individuals who can then prove that they were directly impacted or were resident at the time of that particular atrocity. So what that means is if you show up here in the state, post 1977, right, then in principle, right, the challenge would be then, would you qualify or not, right, for the atrocities that happened in the state prior to 1977, right? That's part of the limitations of that model. So in a way, if we're being direct, that is, I think, the simplest strategy. But again, it is not the strategy that I think personally actually attends to the experience and the condition and the environment that Black Americans in this state experience, right, and continue to experience. Because if you show up in 1980, yes, you might have shown up during a period of mass incarceration and then be eligible for that particular atrocity, but that of course is related to atrocities that came prior. So what we have to do then is we have to decide, if we are going to, say all eligible, African-American descendants of U.S. slavery in California can be compensated, then we have to then decide, I think, a more precise determination of what residency means. So that could look like we have a start date, even if we go back to 1857, we then have to decide on an end date. And then within that end date, we have to say, okay, to what extent does residency specifically begin? So if we have 1857 to say 2020, the question is, at what point, do you have to arrive in the state? At what point do you have to determine residency? Can it be normative, the currently existing basis for determination of residency? And then does that mean that you therefore become eligible for the entire history of African-American discrimination in the state of California? So, there's not one question that we can really answer without asking and answering one of the other questions, right? So question number 4, is directly related to the previous questions. And I think as a body, we have to just simply decide, which approach we want to take, I think on principle, and then we can do the work of trying to craft an actual model around it.
Okay, and then the second to last slide, if you want to address number 5.
Yeah, we don't know number 5.
Okay.
we don't. I mean, this is the question, right? And we will get there. But again, as I mentioned, we can't really answer number 5 yet. And I think, thinking more about it, number 5 needs significant greater participation from the whole body actually to discuss. And I think, at some point we might need to agendize, that as a topic of discussion, for an hour long or something like that.
And the last slide, please. The last slide. Task force member questions, discussion to the experts' responses to the questions, and potential action. So this is the point where we will welcome feedback from task force members on our presentation. And then for purposes of expedition, we are proposing that the task force approve the proposed preliminary recommendations as presented, unless there are any amendments you want to discuss, so that they are returned to the DOJ staff for refinement, finalization, and preparation for presentation, and a final vote during the January task force meeting. So at this time, are there any questions or discussion points about our presentation from the task force members? And if there are not, again, we are asking to entertain a motion to approve the proposed preliminary recommendations as presented. Member Jones Sawyer, you're recognized.
The fact that we've probably come to the end of your presentation, and to be able to give us time to really delve into this, maybe we need to table that portion where we can have discussion, but I'll leave that up to you. You are the chair and you're supposed to keep us on time. And I don't want to have the other members who put in a lot of time and effort to get their presentation done at this time, and they have an hour to do it. And so the only thing I would like to add, because it was brought up in recent newspaper, when it comes to really lineage and whether or not non-African or African Americans or people who are white are able to get, because of the lineage decision we made, we may have to revisit, because if we're not trying to give money to non-African Americans in what we're doing. And so we may have to may add that to what your study, so we can make sure that, I'm going to use the word bulletproof, so that we make sure that the money actually gets to African Americans that need it the most, and we don't leave them out. Then just quickly, only because she's here, my colleague, Assembly Member Mia Banta, just arrived a little while ago, and I would hope that we leave some time for her to speak. She already did. Oh, I'm sorry I missed you. Then that's it.
You, Member Montgomery Stepp, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Moore. I have quite a few questions that I'm not going to ask right now, and that leads me to my point, which is, I think these 5 questions deserve a half a day of us being able to go back and forth with. And the presentation was very thorough, and I don't really see how we could have done it quicker, right? So I just think that I would prefer not to move anything with any kind of stamp on it from the task force at this time. I would love to continue this conversation. Of course, we have to have a timeline because we have to be done by April, I believe, for the DOJ to do. I may be misspeaking, but the point is we only have a couple more months. But I think this conversation deserves a lot more time on all 5 of the questions. This is the foundation of all the other recommendations. So this is the most important, in my opinion, most important conversation that we will have. And so I would just like to put that out there that I don't know if we need a motion to continue the conversation. I think it can just be agendized for the next time, but I don't think we need to put any stamp on it at this point.
So, point of order, I just want to get clarification. You were asking to move this to the January agenda and then not take any action now so that you have appropriate time to discuss it.
Yes, and it is my understanding from looking forward for the proposed agenda that it's already on there, maybe not in the way that I'm describing, but it is on there. And so we can look at those timeframes when we talk about that item. And I'm open to feedback. This is not, we should not be rushing this portion of the conversation.
One thing that we don't want DOJ staff to stand still. So one thing that you want to do, I think, is to, you can make a motion to preliminarily accept it. It stays on the agenda. You can still discuss it, amend it, take whatever action you want at the next time, but recognizing that this is a preliminary answer, it moves it back to them. And then if you have questions, you have an opportunity to send questions, send your comments, send any additional questions you want them to research for January. They can do all of that if you direct them to do that. I'm speaking for the
Yes.
staff.
No, and I'll just add to that. So I think here would be sort of a proposal that I would have. This is your opportunity, and again, time is short, and we do have another presentation and then lunch, and it's a long day already. If there are general questions or comments people have, this is your opportunity as a task force, as a group, to ask those, present those, raise those. You can also communicate to DOJ staff, each of you individually, outside of the course of the meeting. And then I think, if you want more time, we are on expedited time frame. So I think our idea would be to have this sort of resolved by February to inform our final drafting of the report that you all will see in March and April, and then we'll have a final in June. But if you want to, for example, reserve a day of the January meeting to go through these topics, we'll have to talk about that as we set the agenda at the end of the meeting. Have a day of that meeting, or add a day of that meeting, or something like that, to give room to talk through these. Meanwhile, I do think if anybody has significant concerns with any of these recommendations, it would probably be, this is the forum in order to do it, so it's not to set it back like basically a month from now.
So I would do a broad motion that the DOJ continue to work with the committee members and take additional feedback from task force members on these 5 questions. And the reason why is because what will you go back and refine if we don't have a full conversation about it? And that we could completely and utterly change that next month. And so that's just what I would offer. And again, I'm open for discussion.
And you don't need to make a motion. I mean, it's potential action. So if this is an opportunity essentially for, we do need to move forward. Obviously, these are the key things. These are the key items that even I get direction.
So point of clarification, what do you mean by move forward? Because I think the reticence that you're getting right now is you want us to approve it and then come back and then unapprove anything we may have a problem with later. If you're just talking about we accept the report, that's one thing, as is and it's written, but giving us an opportunity to have a full discussion and to go through it. So we may be talking about semantics. Because the way you described it, it was as if we approve the report and any actions within that report, when we just should approve that we accept that they gave us a report that we're going.
Chair, point of order.
That's exactly right.
Point of order. The sentiment has been expressed that we will continue to receive input between now and January. So I don't see what the issue is. And everybody will have time to interface with the staff everybody will have their day. So, Madam Chair, I move that we move the agenda and that we move that. I move that we continue to receive from the task force. I make the motion.
Again, so there's no motion is necessary. I think to Member Jones Sawyer's.
My motion is to make it official so there's no confusion.
Okay.
Exactly what my colleague here was saying, that we will continue to receive conversation on this matter. And at the January meeting, they will have given us sufficient time to discuss it.
Okay, so there has been a motion to continue the conversation around these 5 key questions to be agendized for the January meeting. Also, the deadline for the receipt of any information relating to any additional proposed recommendations for this section as prescribed by the DOJ is December 23rd. So task force members do have an opportunity to provide additional feedback and information and recommendations for these responses, and can send that to the DOJ by December 23rd. And we'll make sure to include those additional proposed recommendations, questions, comments at the January meeting. Is there a second? Thank you. So it has been properly moved by Vice Chair Brown and seconded by Member Montgomery Stepp that we continue the question around resolving the 5 key questions given to us by the Economic Consulting Team for the January meeting, with an understanding that task force members can continue to contribute to this conversation via the submission of additional recommendations, corrections, amendments, questions related to these 5 questions with the deadline of December 23rd as prescribed by the DOJ. Is there any discussion on the matter? Hearing no further discussion, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson for a roll call vote.
For clarity, so the motion is to continue the discussion. You're accepting the report as a report, but not the information. I mean, you're not accepting it as an approval of what's in the report, but just the report itself that is given.
Correct. And when you look at the substance of the report itself, the global recommendation is that further research is needed anyway. So there were we as an advisory committee, we weren't advocating for any final determinations to come out of this meeting anyway.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I will call the roll for the response to the motion. Chair Moore.
Aye.
Chair Moore votes aye. Vice Chair Brown.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown votes aye. Member Bradford. Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills. Member Grills votes aye. Member Holder. Member Holder votes aye. Member Lewis.
Aye.
Member Lewis votes aye. Member Jones Sawyer.
Aye.
Member Jones Sawyer votes aye. Member Montgomery Stepp. Aye. Member Montgomery Stepp votes aye. Member Tamaki.
Aye.
Member Tamaki votes aye. Madam Chair, there were 9 members present and voting. There were 9 ayes and 0 nays.
There are 9 ayes and 0 nays, so the ayes have it and the motion carries. Before we go to the next agenda item, I would just remind task force members to turn in their questions, comments, concerns related to the presentation by December 23rd, and then also invite members of the public to call our hotline, email our task force, contribute to public comment as well. If you all have any suggestions for these 5 questions as well, as this is an iterative process. The next item on our agenda is agenda item number 5, discussion and potential action, advisory committee preliminary recommendations on potential remedial programs, laws, and policies for atrocities in chapters 2 and 8, racial terror, and pathologizing the Black family by Member Grills. You're recognized.
And I'm just for the task force's awareness, just as we have deputy attorneys general who've assisted in the development of all of these. I'm going to announce who they are so you have, the names. We have Jesse Bassbaum and Jennifer Gibson, both from the Civil Rights Department, Civil Rights, my own section, Civil Rights Enforcement section in the Department of Justice, and then Supervisor Christine Chuang, who's been working with all of you and overseeing this all. So they will be prepared to assist as we go along. I'm stretching for time because Dr. Grills is getting set up. We'll have each of the deputies that you've been working with to develop your proposals available to assist. But as you know, we're relying on the members to take the lead in presenting their ideas and engage with one another on the proposals.
Okay, I think this is working now. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to be presenting on two chapters, Chapter 3, Racial Terror, and Chapter 8, Pathologizing Black Families. Starting with Chapter 3, Racial Terror, I want to give a little context to the recommendations to be shared. Enslavement and its aftermath have been referred to as humanicide. That's a term coined by Pieter Drost in 1959, and it was adopted by Hunter Adams as the only term large enough to frame what actually happened to people of African ancestry. Humanicide is the natural crime against human existence in a civilized society. So Adams, in describing his use of that term, said that it transcends Lemkin's original intent of the meaning of genocide and extends Charney's 5 categories of ethnocide. Humanicide is not equivalent to racism, discrimination, or even apartheid. It encompasses and eclipses them. It outlines how the process of killing of a people's or a person's identity, culture, history, language, religion, socialization, and family relations occurred. It considers punitive killings, including those measures used to enforce compliance with the oppressive system. Adams also goes on to say that we are dealing with a system of exploitation that is so comprehensive, it resulted in the denial of a people's ability to survive on their own terms, loss of control of their children's custody and socialization, and untimely loss of control of their future. So that is the backdrop in talking about this issue of racial terror. James Baldwin
Member
said—
Grills, I just got note that folks can't hear, so all task force members just try to speak very close to the mic so that you can be heard.
Okay. James Baldwin said that people are trapped in history and history is trapped in them. Reparations should provide us an escape plan. Now, in that context, when you look at this history, our past is in fact our present. And what you see here is just a sample of the many ways in which racial terror has been meted out against Black people. It's a multifaceted dynamic, and it's going to require a multifaceted set of reparations proposals. So starting with this understanding of racial terror leads to racial trauma. That's an ongoing presence of racial stress. Racial trauma, also known as race-based traumatic stress, refers to the stressful impact of emotional pain of experiencing racism and discrimination. Common traumatic stress reactions that reflect racial trauma include things like increased vigilance and suspicion. One, in fact, could argue that Black people are always on alert for the next thing that's going to happen that could cost us our lives. It's reflected in increased sensitivity to threat, the sense of a foreshortened future, and maladaptive responses to stress like aggression, substance use, defensiveness. So what we're talking about is a multidimensional, multi-generational terror, and it requires, in terms of reparations, building a culture of repair to restore a number of things, including psychological, emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being, a sense of agency, hope, narrowed sense of time is addressed. And what that means is that people who have a narrowed sense of time are living in a chronic state of danger. And as a result, they do not develop a sense of future. And unfortunately, our babies, our children, often have lost a sense of hope, and they frequently view dying as an expected outcome. I can't tell you how many Black teenagers I've heard say, I'm not gonna make it to 21 anyway. Okay. It also involves addressing and restoring community well-being and the ability to see and be with each other as Black people from a place of compassion, connection, and free of the anti-Black narrative. So we must build a culture of repair, because exposure to racism can result in all of these psychological issues that I mentioned. It leads to basic behavioral exhaustion and psychological distress. And that racial trauma doesn't occur in a vacuum. It's worsened by the cumulative impact of multiple traumas, personally and multi-generationally. And then what you end up seeing is it beginning to impact and shape things like community violence, victimization, et cetera. Racism and the trauma that results from racism exists at the interpersonal, environmental, institutional, and cultural levels, therefore affecting physical, social, and psychological health of individuals and entire communities. Eliminating racism and racial trauma, and therefore racial terror, will require interventions at all levels, from the individual to the family, to the community, to the nation. So I know that I'm about to share some of the recommendations related to racial terror, both in this segment and on the Pathologizing the Black Family. You may see overlap with other areas that are going to be covered by other advisory committees. And at that point, we can figure out how to synthesize. I also want to say that these are preliminary. We're still doing the work of the legal analysis and refinement of what we will be sharing today, but also considering some other potential recommendations. So lastly, I have organized the recommendations here in terms of the international law categories. Okay, so the first here is racial terror recommendations to build a culture of repair, addressing guarantees of non-repetition. And I'm not going to go into a lot of discussion about each of these, there's just not time. But when the task force will get the full written summary that includes the legal analysis as well as the thinking and some background information. So eliminate legal protections for peace officers who violate civil or constitutional rights. That involves eliminating the requirement that a victim of police violence show that the officer specifically intended to violate a constitutional right. Secondly, conduct a comprehensive audit of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation and county detention facilities to determine the extent of racially biased treatment of African American youth and adults who are in custody. Third, incorporate behavioral health clinicians into the 911 response. New programs, for example, one in Los Angeles County or Los Angeles City, pairs police officers with behavioral health clinicians as they patrol different communities and respond to calls for assistance. And I think we could learn some lessons from those both in LA City, San Mateo County, Pleasanton, Palo Alto, Sacramento, Humboldt, Modesto, etc. Fourth, establish state funds and provide criteria to support culturally aligned, trauma-informed practices in detention facilities and public schools in California. What we tend to get are evidence-based practices that in many instances are culturally bankrupt. And then when we don't resonate with that particular intervention, we get blamed for not being psychologically minded enough or verbally efficient or proficient enough to respond to the treatment. In terms of rehabilitation, establish and fund community wellness centers within African American communities to decrease mental health stigma, teach stress reduction and resilience tools, create communal spaces, support cultural and racial socialization to support mental health, and to provide community-defined evidence as opposed to just evidence-based practices for prevention and early intervention strategies in mental health services. Each one of these I could unpack, but again, time does not allow. But I will simply say that not only are these policy recommendations, they're policy recommendations that are aligned with the cultural values and perspective and worldview of Black people. For example, creating communal spaces is essential to resilience. We are a communal people. We are each other's medicine, as the proverb states. And so there's a need to be able to allow for healing to happen in spaces and places other than formal therapy and mental health intervention. And then offer mental health and health screening and referrals would be a part of these community wellness centers. In terms of rehabilitation, require the California Department of Public Health to issue guidance on strategies under Medicaid and CHIP to increase African American mental health and substance use disorder care, provider education, training, recruitment, and retention. You should know that there is an existing model that can be built upon that is part of an initiative in the California Department of Public Health, funded by MHSA dollars and managed by the California Department of Public Health's Office of Health Equity. Number 7, conduct a comprehensive audit of California County Departments of Mental Health regarding their management of MHSA funds to date. One of the things that we have seen happen in the past is that the local county departments of mental health do not dispense the funds that they have available to them, and that would increase the number of community-based organizations that are able to deliver services that are culturally aligned and reflect the context and historical reality of the communities being served. The question is, to what extent are funds dispensed to the community as intended? And I put the as intended because when these MHSA dollars are dispensed, sometimes it looks like business as usual, as opposed to the intent of opening the door for more community-defined evidence and culturally based practices. In terms of restitution, fund community-driven solutions to decrease community violence at the family, school, and neighborhood levels. Possible funding source for this would be MHSA dollars dispensed by the county departments of mental health, and then place emphasis on prevention as well as early intervention, environmental change strategies, and the promotion of resilience in the face of racial stress. So that concludes the racial terror. I'll now share some thoughts about the pathologizing the Black family, and we can follow with questions after, if time permits. So in terms of pathologizing the Black family, we have to start with the basics. Basics is that white families in this country, since its beginning, has looked at white families as exemplars of social stability and Black families as exemplars of social instability. That narrative has been with us, not just even from the start of the United States as we know it today, but also for generations prior to that, starting in Portugal, under Prince Henry, who had to come up with a rationale for why he enslaved Africans in Portugal. And he got this guy Zurara to write a book that basically laid out the current anti-Black narrative that we are still living with today. So first of all, in terms of pathologizing the Black family, a little quick context. The racialized narrative is a critical issue. Black families are in disarray and were better off under slavery is one of those false racialized narratives. Another is that the impression of Black families that are often inspired from the news, television, movies, and music videos. Movie or media outlets, I should say, promoted and continue to promote racially biased portrayals and myths that pathologize Black families and idealize white families with respect to things like poverty, crime, mental health, and more. These reinforce debunked narratives are used to justify actions from police brutality to economic policies that will hurt not just Black families, but all families for generations to come. Scholars have long documented how news and opinion media warp public perceptions of gender and race by reinforcing myths and stereotypes about women and people of color and Black people especially. And so they play a dangerous role in spreading these anti-Black narratives, and that needs to be addressed. Governmental agencies and institutions implement policies and practices grounded in that narrative. And at the root of it all, of what ails our community, as Enola Aird from Community Healing Network has said, is the toxic idea that our lives are less valuable than the lives of others. Overcoming and overturning that idea is the key to transforming our lives. So to kind of end on this context piece, we have to understand that implicit bias is another contributor to the pathologizing of the African-American family. And every institution, every organization in this country contributes to this pathologizing of the Black family and the deepening of the implicit bias. Just as a quick example, I'm going to show you a subject matter topic and the images that are associated with it. When people speak of poverty or welfare, Black families. When people speak about child abuse or absentee fathers, Black families. When people speak about crime, Black people, Black families. There's a laundry list. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And we have information to counter these narratives. For example, with the absentee fathers, there was a 2013 study that is sent from the CDC itself that showed that Black fathers actually spend more time engaged in parenting than fathers of other races, doing things like bathing, diapering, taking their kids to activities, helping them with homework, etc. So how do we begin to flip that script? Because if we don't, there will always be this kind of underlying ideology that will disrupt and corrupt how Black families are seen and treated. So in terms of recommendations, not sure what happened there. Under the category of guarantees of non-repetition, reduce or eliminate racial disparities in the removal of African-American children from their homes and families. That involves audits of removals. That involves implementing procedures and annual state audits to address implicit bias. That involves reinvesting in promising child welfare community-based prevention practices that involve community-based organizations. There's another policy that has not yet been fully developed related to the overdiagnosis of African-American children in schools using a diagnosis category of social emotional disturbance. What that reflects is a diagnosis that tends to involve more severe depictions of the mental health status of children, using diagnoses like schizophrenia and conduct disorder. This ends up pigeonholing Black children into these categories in school that really pretty much writes the roadmap for the rest of their lives. In terms of guarantees of non-repetition, curtail law enforcement activity in California schools and determine alternate methods to increase school safety. Institute implicit bias and de-escalation training for school-based personnel, particularly law enforcement if they must be present on school campuses. Eliminate or reduce charges for phone calls between those in custody in county jails and their families, consistent with California's recent elimination of call fees for people who are incarcerated in state facilities. Eliminate interest on past due child support and eliminate past due child support owed to the government for non-custodial parents. Amend section 5845 of the Welfare and Institutions Code relating to mental health, whereby the governor would appoint an additional member of the Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission, a commission that I see in part as a gatekeeper for what services get to be offered across our state, what kind of research evidence is considered credible, et cetera. And this commission really needs to have someone on it that understands mental health disparities, particularly as they relate to the African American community. Pursuant to Welfare and Institutions Code 5840, prioritize for adoption, prevention, and early intervention spending on community-defined evidence practice services at both the state and county levels. Again, this is to offer a wider range of opportunity for mental health support other than evidence-based practices. This involves the inclusion of CDEP language and under local jurisdictions with a concrete example of strategies that constitute culturally competent and linguistically appropriate prevention and intervention for Black residents of California. 9, increase the pipeline of funded, culturally qualified, community-based organizations to provide CDEPs, including provisions for technical assistance and program evaluation support. That's one of the ways that a lot of promising practices that are generated from our communities are dead in the water. There are often requirements for evaluation of effectiveness that require the application of research methodology that community-based organizations don't necessarily have internal expertise and resources. And so we need to be able to equip them with that, along with technical assistance for other capacity building needs of those organizations. In terms of rehabilitation, establish and fund early intervention programs that address intimate partner violence within the African American community. As a quick side note, if you want to begin to understand what I said earlier, that our past is our present, as it relates to intimate partner violence, go and look at the movie Sankofa by Haile Gerima. Pay attention to the segment where the enslaved members of our community are on a hill where some members of the community are being beaten because they tried to escape. In that scene, you will see the seeds of present day intimate partner violence and Black on Black violence. What we are dealing with is not something new or a reflection of current day issues. It is an ongoing manifestation of the legacy of enslavement. So support the victims, the abuser, and minor children within the family exposed to the violence is important under item 10. And then lastly, number 11 is a policy idea that is still in formulation related to addressing the disproportionate number of African Americans who are unhoused and pathologized due to their unhoused status. Thank you. Discussion? Vice Chair Brown, you recognize.
Madam Chair, my colleagues, I must personally say Dr. Grills has knocked the ball out of the park, and she has done a superlative job of stating the case. One additional matter I would like to mention that are we not consider that through public policy, Dr. Grills, many of our watering holes throughout this state were destroyed. South Central Los Angeles, the Fillmore, Allensworth, those were watering holes where we gathered, where we achieved psychological and social wellness and celebrated our culture. And in terms of recommendations, public monies ought to be made available to reestablish all of those entities that were destroyed by this government. And let me give you an example where she talked about in terms of how the media, not the media usually, I'm not knocking at you now. I'm just talking about what I'm talking about. But Dr. Warnock, Raphael Warnock, was just reelected to the U.S. Senate. Do you know what the media of America did? It made it appear that Dr. Warnock was an anomaly, he was an oddity, and what they all said, wow, those black preachers sure do know how to talk. Instead of saying he gave an excellent victory speech, what the image, that their expectation they have of us, that we don't know how to talk. But we know how to talk. Just give us an opportunity. That's what all black people need, opportunity. But we've been denied opportunity to go through the process of becoming excellent in all the endeavors of life. So you hit us where we needed to be hit this morning. And I want to say, anyone who takes issue with what she stated, and the harms ought to be corrected, need to have a look in the mirror and search their heart. But what she's talking about is basic humanity. Humanity. But mind you, the reason why we're so sick with this distorted image of black folks is that during the 4th century BC, Aristotle, one of the fathers of Western thought, said that the African and the Ethiopian were inferior because our skin was dark. And the only way we could become somebody, we have to go up to Europe and become lighter. He also said that we would never be capable of self-governance. We would always have to have a white man or white woman over us. That's where it all began, way, way back there. But thank God, Dr. Grills, you put it in context, and I trust and hope that people who really are human and have a heart will hear what she's saying and not try to make the case that we don't deserve our humanity being honored and respected.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I also would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge and thank the work of the 2 Deputy Attorneys General who worked so hard on the legislative analysis and the preparation of these recommendations, Jesse Bassbaum and Jennifer Gibson, who are sitting right here. They did a tremendous job working with me on those 2 chapters.
Member Montgomery Step, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Grills, thank you very, very much. What I really, there are a lot of takeaways, but just from a procedural standpoint, the way that you categorize the type of reparations is very, very important. I think we should carry that throughout all of our presentations because that's where there can be some confusion about, you know, what categories these recommendations lie. So thank you for doing that. Also, just for the piece about the wellness centers, I do think about my city where we have a historically African American community. We no longer have a majority African American community, and so just kind of adding some of that language in there would I think be helpful, because we know that when we craft solutions, if we're not targeted, then oftentimes those that are hurt most do not, Black people don't receive the benefits of broader recommendations. And so just couching that with historically African-American communities would help. The last thing that I'll say, we'll probably bring it up in our presentation is as an overarching issue. I don't think it comes up as much in these recommendations, but this issue between the states and the charter cities, and how charter cities can say, no, we don't want to do that. We're a charter city. I don't think that these categories and what the recommendations propose fall under those what we would call municipal affairs, but I just want to flag that because we don't want to cast this out and even give municipalities an opportunity to say we just don't want to do it and we don't have to because we're a charter city. But really, again, thank you very much for setting that example of how we categorize the reparations. Thank you.
Member Jones Sawyer, you're recognized.
And I too want to thank you. When I get in discussions with individuals who are probably descendants of slave owners that tell me that they didn't do the harm, and when I try to tell them that their ancestors and their harm that they perpetuated on African Americans, it's still here, and that it's infecting everything that we do in society. And when I became chair of public safety and started visiting prisons, one of the things that I noticed when I talked to individuals who have changed their lives and they're now on a new path, they talk about early childhood trauma, that the trauma that they went through when they were children, whether it's poverty, whether it's child abuse, whether it's domestic violence, all of those that were foisted on our community as I'm listening to you, that were taught or inculcated in our community, don't go away overnight. And it appears as if society in California has perpetuated it within us and is not doing anything to take it out of us, to cure us, to relieve us, to exercise this out of us. And so if we can do something on the early childhood development, I know you were talking about centers. I've been able to get $50 million to go out into the community and have nonprofits do that. And we've seen immediate results from that, with crime levels going down, more kids graduating from high school and more going on to college, more having a more stable life, especially if their home doesn't, because of the prison industrial system, they don't have a father in the house or a mother in the house, just totally disenfranchised, the family structure, that us putting together something to where we can, as best we can, replicate a family situation. Those of us that are long in the tooth remember teen posts and all of those things where kids came together with an adult that would give them some kind of guidance. All of those have been decimated or haven't been funded. And so I think in addition to your work, we really need to get to our young people. And we really need to understand that a lot of these kids are suffering more pressure kind of support for our young people, because if we do this now, as far as African American race, we can do a whole lot more for all of us, generations and generations. Then when they look back on this task force and look at what we did with the mental health, we'll be able to have benefits long after we're gone and this task force is gone. So thank you. This is excellent work.
I just on that note, I was reminded as you were talking about something that was in the LA Times a few months ago, where Ibram Kendi noted that Black teenagers experience or witness an average of 5 instances of racist discrimination per day, and that per day, and that the levels of exposure to violence and crime, as you know, because we talked about Crenshaw High School in a presentation recently, that our children, if we use the standard of the ACEs, you know, adverse childhood exposure, our kids are off the chart. And it's a testament to the resilience of Black people that we're not all stark raving mad at this point. Truly.
Senator Bradford, you're recognized.
I don't know if mine. I too just want to thank Dr. Grills for that powerful presentation. And what struck me most was your reference to the young folks with the lack of hope and seeing no future. And it really resonated with me because I coached baseball for 16 years. And I coached young African-American men, not of low-income communities. These were all middle-class kids from great families. And I was blown away with the number of young men that I would talk to who didn't have a future past high school because many of them thought they wouldn't live past, as you stated, 21 or 25 or whatever the case may be. And I think society as a whole has to understand that these are the vestiges of slavery and all the trauma that we have experienced, and it's still impacting young folks today. And I think that's why this work that we're doing is so vitally important, to understand that this is not something that, again, was 200 years ago. It's still happening today, and still impacting the way we interact with one another, as well as how society as a whole views this. So I just want to thank you for that.
Member Holder, you're recognized.
I also wanted to thank Dr. Grills for that incredibly lucid, provocative presentation. It's just superlative, as was previously said. I do have a question for you, given your extraordinary expertise in the field of psychology. Given your extraordinary expertise in the field of psychology, about positive racial identity formation and whether we should be centering curriculums around positive racial identity formation. And especially given your analysis of implicit bias, you know, the role that stereotype thinking that emanates all the way back from the slavery period is playing in creating this master narrative, right? That replicates this notion that African Americans are inferior and white Americans are superior. So that constantly has to be counteracted, right? In order for us to repair the family, ourselves as individuals, and to shift this narrative. And so I'm specifically thinking about positive racial identity formation as a construct for curriculums to help with that repair.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Couple of things related to that. One is that the community wellness centers would be one place where those kinds of socialization processes could happen.
like on Saturday schools, and children are taught about who they are and whose they are, and what they're capable of, what value systems, drive who they are, their family, and the community from a historical perspective. The way we talk about it in psychology are two types of socialization. There's racial socialization and there's cultural socialization. And I think until we have eliminated the racial terror, we're going to probably need both. The cultural socialization speaks to the things that you were describing. And in fact, one of our prior expert witnesses, Dr. Howard Stevenson, spoke to some examples from his own work and others that deliver this cultural socialization, which helps to solidify a sense of who you are, unencumbered by the lie of white superiority and Black inferiority. It also, these cultural socialization really does try to root who we are as a people, not just from our entrance to the United States or to the shores of what is now the United States as enslaved people, but that we had a long and storied history prior to that that is worthy to be told. The Community Healing Network, as part of their Emotional Emancipation Circles work, has developed a whole kind of 21 things all Black children should know as a beginning curriculum around that. Secondly, then there's the racial socialization, which is teaching Black children to understand the anti-Black reality that they live in so that they stay alive. That's things like what to do if you get stopped by the police, right? How to speak to authority figures, how to present yourself, not about who's right or wrong, but how do you present yourself so that you will be heard and you will live to see another day, kind of thing. So I think that the wellness centers is one location for this, but I'll also remind you, when I talked about those community defined evidence practices, many of them actually include components of their prevention early intervention that do exactly what you're talking about, which is why I think that they resonate so strongly with children and families in the Black community, why they have such high return rates and participation, and why those children start doing better. And we've got multiple examples. The Pen or Pencil project, that was a national group mentoring, culturally based process, also did the same thing. And those children, we did a study of them, 2,000 of the kids that were involved across the country, and they definitely showed differences in their academics, their sense of who they were, their values, their levels of stress, much better than the kids who did not have access to that.
Any other discussion points?
I do have one comment.
Member Tamaki.
There's nothing more I can say that has not been said. Member Grills, that was a brilliant presentation. I do want to create some space for the DOJ staff. From my own personal experience in interacting with the staff, they're assigned to this task force, but it's because they want to be on it. They have a personal interest in supporting this effort, which is historic. And I'm wondering if Jennifer Gibson or Jesse Bosbaum has any comments on the work you've done in connection with this presentation. If not, totally okay, but I want to lift you up and give you that opportunity.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Member Tamaki. And if I understand the question correctly, there's wondering about our sort of motivations for participating.
Or anything you want to add to the presentation, just because you all worked on it.
That's kind of you. Nothing in particular that I would add, and Dr. Grills, of course, is the expert, and I've learned a ton working with her, and I'm grateful for her teachings. Speaking personally, briefly from my background, before working in this capacity, I was a public defender in Alameda County, working in Oakland primarily, and obviously the criminal justice system is a significant part of the work that the task force is doing. But in that work as a public defender, working with clients, working with families, it became abundantly clear that their criminal issue was only the tip of the iceberg. And the underlying iceberg is much of what Dr. Grills has spoken about, and all of the other members' comments and insights about childhood trauma and things like that were issues that I, as a public defender, could not address, unfortunately, because we were at the sort of the tail end in some ways. So I'm very grateful to be able to participate and learn and try to contribute.
I'd like to echo everything Jesse said, and to also say that it's been an honor working for Dr. Grills and assisting her and learning from her. And so sometimes you think you know everything about your community and all the trauma, and doing this work, you realize you didn't know the half of it. And so just to learn from Dr. Grills has been a tremendous honor. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other discussion points? If not, Member Grills, is there a motion? Do you have a motion to present to the task force?
So I'll just, if I may.
Sure.
So I think what we can do is we can treat the whole day. I think we've got a good sort of rubric to work off of from Member Joan Sawyer, that essentially this is the venue for members to all weigh in, offer additional suggestions for the advisory committees to consider, the deputies and the DOJ team to work on. If there's anything anybody strongly opposes or doesn't think should be included, or there's a way members think a proposal should be curtailed, this is the forum to raise that. We can obviously follow up, but we need to hear from all of you, and this group session is the way to do that. Otherwise, we can treat everything as sort of taken under submission as long as there's no opposition, objection, etc. And then we'll come back with another report out in the next meeting, and TBD what that looks like, whether it's outlines for the members and the public to consider or another presentation.
Okay, great. Any last thoughts, Member Grills?
No, just that I want to remind folks that this is a work in progress, so that there's still more that may be added, and definitely with what I've heard today, there are some things we will follow up on. Thank you.
Yeah, as I said to the media, this is really a report back phase. 45 minutes is not enough, nearly enough for each of these presentations. So this is really a forum for the advisory committees to report back on the work that we've been doing over the past 2 months. All right, so now we'll move to agenda item number 6, which is the lunch break. And we will come back at 1:30. Thank you.
Thank you, family, so much. Let me mute the background because ScrewTube gives me strikes and starts to mess with my broadcast if any background music is played. So I'm going to mute them. We'll keep going. I'm gonna let you guys break for lunch. I just want to thank each and every one of you for your prayers and for keeping me lifted in this work. We've been at it for a long time, family. And I get weary. I go down with this on my mind, and I wake up with it on my mind. So, let me just show myself more big. The fact of the matter is, we are being extincted, and it's very difficult for me to keep my cool when I'm out here watching it in real time. It's not okay for me. Hold on, let me just a second. I hear background. It's not okay for me to be accomplished and see my fellow brethren walking through the streets with crap on his pants, begging for a handout, laying outside of white folks' establishment, immigrant folks' establishments. And folks want to try to make me out to be a xenophobe. And I'm sick and tired of having to explain myself. But just in case the immigrants are watching, I am not anti-immigrant. I am anti the weaponization of immigration against American freedmen to keep us tethered to the bottom caste. And I want to read to you what I was robbed of during public comments, because I don't even know if I'll get a chance to bless the mic tomorrow. It really, really sickens me that this is supposed to be for us and about us, but we get restricted on time. Now, I don't mind that we get restricted, but how dare you have us spend our precious time crafting our messages so that we're under 3 minutes, only to give the audience that's there live. We've been here since the beginning. I've been here since the beginning, broadcasting live. And so while I get that they're now live and they got people standing and waiting, it is grossly unfair for Chair Moore to decide to give our time, who are waiting on this line. I've been in that queue since 8 o'clock this morning. They didn't get to us till damn near what, 9:45, 10 o'clock. And so then we got just a few minutes to cram in a few speakers on the line that have been holding. And so my frustration is with this process. How dare you decide to give them our time and then limit us to 1 minute and not tell us we've been restricted as well? So it's just those kind of things culminated. I thought the mic was mute. It was open. I was swearing and crying and just frustrated because we formed. We are the co-founders of the contemporary reparations grassroots movement. Since back what? When Kamala Harris threw her hat in the ring for president. So you can only imagine. I got over 300 videos about these issues that are plaguing our people as I continue to watch us sheep walk to the polls to keep rewarding the Democrats for their intentional neglect of American freedmen whose ancestors built this country with their lives. So I gotta fight every damn body. We got to fight every damn body. I'm not alone. I just happen to be who God has chosen to tell it to these folks straight, no chaser, to tell it to these folks the TR roof, to tell them like a TI is. I ascribe to none of us are free until all of us are free. You understand what I'm saying? I know most of you in the chat who are my co-hosts understand what I'm telling you because you share in my sentiment. So I am an empath for American freedmen because I see what's happening in real time. Not in my community because I happen to live amongst the richest of folks. But you just crossed 7th Street and you are in on the side of town where our folks are struggling to hang on out here. And my issue is, you got this bullshiggity proposal not even coming out to July 23. How long is it going to take you from that to start going in these streets and getting these people up off the street and giving them their reparations? Because most of them don't have bank accounts. She told you 6% of us are here. That's the 6% that remain. We were once 17% of the population. And that's why we've gone from around 7 million to around 2 million American freedmen. And y'all want to sit up here and mince words over who should be awarded and cutoff times and all this bullshiggity when we are still here, living these vestiges, being taxpayers, and showing up to these polls to vote for our own extinction, to vote for our own erasure and replacement. That is what American freedmen are doing, because nobody even knows we're over here, except a few of y'all that follow me. This is the stuff that don't go viral. The stuff go viral is Umar Johnson's big fat ass mouth, who thinks it's okay to collect millions for an institution for our children that he has never built, to line his own freaking pockets. Or folks who are grifting off of our work while we're in the shadows getting this shit done to our own stress levels. Folks out here grifting, becoming YouTube sensations, and holding reparations marches where they're bringing out demo rats who don't even have us on their freaking platform, while I'm trying to get folks to understand the only way out is to bring these demo rats to their freaking knees for their intentional neglect of American freedmen by voting for closed border and citizens first candidates. You understand me? I don't give a damn if you're a GOP. Y'all can't name me one thing Trump has done as atrocious as these Democrats' ethno-genocidal plans of American freedmen. When y'all can match those records up, then holler at me. But all this withhold the freaking vote, no tangibles, no vote. Look at what's happening as we don't participate in this corrupt process, calling the Democrats the lesser of two evils as they erase and replace us with the immigrant class who's got their freaking hands out for what we are owed. Where do you think that leaves us? If they are 60,000 liquid from a 2004 to 2014 Color of Wealth LA report to American freedmen, U.S. black, $200 liquid, what the hell are you voting blue for? But far too many of us are politically ignorant and don't know the facts and don't know the data and are sitting comfortably because, oh, it's not in my community, it's not in my state. Keep living. I'm trying to sound the freaking alarm over here to get y'all active. Y'all just want to lay back and pretend to be included. You might have a job, but you ain't got no wealth because they killed and stole all of it. And then want us to make us the derelicts of society that they are. They want to displace that onto the American freedmen, when that is who they are. They don't even give a damn about their own white folks, their own glacier donkeys. But the glacier donkeys will not be impacted by immigration in the way that we as American freedmen are, because we start from negative, okay? We start from negative. So with that being said, let me read my comments because I don't even know if they're going to read. Let me read my comments tomorrow. In a Newsweek article dated 12/8/22, some experts are concerned that the current language of the eligibility criteria might open the door for individuals identifying as white to possibly receive reparations. Dr. Darity states, if this is the complete language of the eligibility criteria, it's possible that an individual who is not living as a black person in the U.S. or somebody whose ancestors endured slavery abroad might be eligible. Miss Taifa said white folks proving lineage based on rape of Black women and children might be eligible. Mr. Lewis said the person claiming eligibility based upon lineage has to prove they've been harmed by the lingering effects of slavery. How do we prove it? For example, how do we, as American freedmen, prove discrimination in hiring practices because we don't speak Spanish or simply because we're Black? How do we prove our salaries aren't commensurate with immigrants and whites when we aren't privy to what our co-workers earn? Ms. Taifa said eligibility should include Black individuals who suffered discrimination in California up until 1965, which excludes those of us currently living out the vestiges of the harms as outlined in the 500-page preliminary report, and those of us who've been legislated out of the state due to unemployment and underemployment year to date. She goes on to reintroduce race-based reparations for Black immigrants who suffered Jim Crow. Translation: Black immigrants who chose to flee their Holocaust to tether themselves to our never-ending Holocaust, even though the government at every branch has chosen to bury American freedmen under immigration, making them more American than us with our vote, our affirmative action, and our reparations. As I testified at other hearings, a 2004 to 2014 LA Color of Wealth report states African Blacks were 60,000 liquid, damn near 20 years ago, damn near 10 years ago, to U.S. Black $200 liquid. The only thing I agree with in this hair-raising article is what Ms. Taifa said. American freedmen should, and I quote, automatically be deemed eligible without having to go through exhaustive genealogical studies and analysis. The only proof that should be required as far as the reparationist perspective is concerned is a birth certificate from your line with Negro or colored on it. In closing, all American freedmen in the state of California and those who've been legislated out of California since Newsom signed AB 3121 should be eligible, should receive cash to do with as they choose. There should be a moratorium on legal immigration until we've been completely repaired and made American. And the gate surrounding lineage should be that you've identified as Black or African American in the last 2 census. I'll land there. So this is what I didn't get an opportunity to say because they rudely gave me a third of the time I'm supposed to be allocated, placating to the folks that showed up live. We have 50 people in queue. So I don't care that you got 50 people on the mic. If you're only going to give us an hour, share the time. So tomorrow I'll be back early again, trying to get in the queue to say what I've just said. We'll be back this afternoon with part 2. I hope you can come back. I thank you guys for keeping the chat lit. But I need to take a break, as you guys do too. Get you some nourishment. It's a lot of trauma in these hearings, okay? When you're an empath, it weighs on you heavily. It just is what it is. So if you're not able to make it back with me this afternoon for part 2 of day 1, I want to say a prayer, my usual covering over my people, that the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever Freedmen and its allies are, God truly is, because family, you are the face of God, the voice of God, the body temple of the Spirit of the living God. If no one's told you today how much they love you, know that I love you, family. Black and Freedmen strong. Yes, I do. And until we meet again, family, I want you to make it a beautiful, God-inspired rest of your afternoon. And until then, in the meantime and in between time, we keeping this pedal to the metal. And I believe it for each and every one of us. A ton of peace